Between England and Pakistan on BBC One later at 11:15. And tomorrow afternoon after 1, live ball-by-ball coverage of the tournament continues on 5 Live Sports Extra. And then for the rest of the week you can see the evening highlights programme here on BBC Two at 11:20.
We're on a mission, so get ready for some time travel.
For the past 40 years,
it was a simple but brilliant idea.
Together, the Open University and the BBC
yellow, blue, green, yellow
have been making learning more and more inspiring.
I don't like the way you've put your crash helmet on. What's that for?
Welcome to the story of Coast.
Quite big waves out here.
The Open University in partnership with the BBC.
That's absolutely fabulous.
Celebrating 40 years of bringing inspiration to the nation.
So now on BBC Two, capturing the mood in the UK and across Europe, David Dimbleby with the results and analysis of the much anticipated European elections.
Hello, welcome to the BBC election studio where we're reporting the European election results. We had the local election results on Friday. These votes, of course, were cast on Thursday alongside those, and we're getting the first indications of a fairly extraordinary night, with Labour in its heartland in the northeast down nearly 10%. We don't know what the rest of the country is doing, but John Curtis here and his team will be assessing it and bringing us the results as they come in, and we'll also be looking at the overall picture of Europe, of course, too. We've had some results in, but not very many so far. And during the rest of this evening with Emily Maitlis, we've got our panel of 3 wise men, or wise people, I should say, with respect. We've got Danny Finkelstein, Polly Toynbee and Steve Richards. And Emily, who'll be assessing how things come and showing us the general picture. Emily.
Yeah, we'll be looking at the shape of Europe, as you say, as well as its stories, possibly its scandals. And after that extraordinary week, the panel and I will be looking at what could happen to Westminster politics as a result.
Good. Well, we shall see all that and the kind of challenge that the Tories have. Now, our political editor, Nick Robinson, is, of course, here and already has things to tell us. Nick.
Well, what is striking is that we know that all politics is, in a sense, local, where people look at their own patch and see what it's happening there. And we're already getting rumours that the Tories will top the vote in Wales, that in Hull, for example, UKIP are coming second. These will be the results in which Labour MPs are able to study and say, well, what does that really tell us? Because the debate about the Labour leadership so far has happened before any of this was known.
We've got the counts going on in Leeds for Yorkshire and Humberside, or the Humber, going on at the moment. And these counts, conducted just like a general election, of course, they began earlier today on Sunday. It's taken quite a long time because the ballot papers are so long, and then they have to explain the D'Hondt system. They have to work out which MEPs have actually been elected from a whole range, some 15 or more on the ballot paper. UKIP already complaining that their position at the bottom of the long ballot paper meant it was often turned over and you couldn't actually see their name, so people weren't voting for them. Anyway, all of that will come out in the wash, no doubt, and we'll see what they do, but Jeremy Vine will be looking at the results as they come through. Jeremy.
David, we have our map of the EU, the 27 countries here, and we'll be animating that as the result comes in. But let's first look at our UK map. Of course, this is an election. Unlike the council elections on Thursday, this one went across the whole of the UK. That makes it particularly fascinating. 12 regions there you can see. Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. By the way, Northern Ireland counting on Monday, so won't be mentioned much in the next few hours. And then the 9 regions of England. And we do have some results in already. Great thing about our system here is we can actually zoom in on local councils, because counting in lots of areas coming in through the councils, and that gives us a sense of the picture for maybe Labour MPs who are worrying about the temperature in their own constituency. So let me go, if I can, to our map first of all and look at the northeast, which is where we got one of the first results in. Now, MEPs, you can see first of all 2009. Who's been elected? All fairly simple here, isn't it? Look at this. One Conservative, one Labour and one Lib Dem. So the system has spread those three MEPs quite evenly. However, if we go to 2004 share, let's just have a look at this. And I will show you the change in the vote. Now, this is where you will see the Labour vote and the attrition of it caused presumably by recent events and other things. Labour 34%. This is 5 years ago in the European elections. Conservatives, you can see there, 19%. So 34% for Labour 5 years ago. What are they getting this year? Let's have a look at this. So Labour now on 25%, pretty much down, what, 9–10% there in that vote in the northeast. A drastic drop for Labour. If I take you to Yorkshire now, we can have a look at a particular council vote that's giving a portrait in Kingston upon Hull. Why don't we look there? Because, of course, the constituencies, parliamentary Westminster constituencies of Alan Johnson, the presumed leadership contender if Gordon Brown finds the floorboards do give way below him. Alan Johnson's seat is there, so's John Prescott's, classic Labour territory. Hull, here we go. Let's look at the share in Hull in 2004, first of all. So you see there, Labour, 32% in 2004. Clear winners in that constituency, and the Lib Dems there on 20%, so 32% for Labour 2004. What's it doing now? We've got these votes in for you. Well, look at this. UKIP, 21, and then second place Labour down 11% in one of their heartlands on 21%. Now, it's not all bad news for Labour. We've got a result coming in from Leicester, which I'll show you. Just the counting through. Of course, it's the council area, not the exact constituency area. That needs to be made clear. I'll just show you Leicester here very quickly, if I can. And let's have a look. Share in 2004, just very, very quickly for Leicester. Labour 28% and UKIP 19%. So we keep that 28% figure in mind for Labour. What's happening in Leicester now? Labour going up to 37%. So for some reason, they jumped. Looks like the UKIP voters just simply folded in Leicester for some reason. So that's one tiny, tiny bit of good news for Labour, but there's not much of it around tonight.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. We're joined now by the Labour Chief Whip, Nick Brown. Mr. Brown, good evening. Thanks for coming to us. Let's first of all deal with the result in the northeast, where your share is down just over 9%. What do you make of that? Why has it happened?
Our share of the vote is down, that's absolutely correct, although we've still had a very strong win here. What our voters have been telling us on the doorstep is that they're staying at home. They're disappointed in us. And there are two principal reasons. Overwhelmingly, it's the row about the parliamentary expenses and what's been happening at Westminster. But it's also the economic downturn. People want to see us fighting our way through it. We have, although employment has risen very, very strongly in the region over the last decade, it's falling away pretty sharply now, and people are worried and frightened about that.
You're the Chief Whip, you're in charge of discipline among the backbenchers. You've been mentioned as having revealed some names of people who are planning to sign the motion against the Prime Minister. Are you concerned tonight that if these results go on at that sort of level, there really will be a call from the backbenches for Gordon Brown to be replaced?
Look, this region, the northeast of England, needs a Labour government, to deal with the recessionary forces that are at work in the economy, and to put in independent invigilation of the expenses, and to have the system so clean and transparent that it is beyond criticism. And that's what we're setting out to do. Now, we need a united party to be able to do that, so we need to get these quarrels and divisions behind us.
What about a party united behind behind a new Prime Minister, a new leader?
Well, the party activists have been saying to me here, and our candidate, our winning candidate, Stephen Hughes, said in his address that he supports Gordon Brown's leadership. That's what the activists are saying. They want the party to get behind the Prime Minister, to get behind the Cabinet, and to deliver for us very, very quickly on completely reformed expenses system for MPs, one that is transparent and beyond criticism, and to get on with the main job, which is getting this region through the economic downturn.
Sitting on my right here in the studio is Lord Falconer, who earlier today said, I think probably it will need a change of leader if we're to get unity. What do you say to him?
I heard his address on the midday political programme, and he's entitled to his view. But if he wants to see that through, he needs to get the requisite number of members of the Parliamentary Labour Party in the Commons to put up an alternative candidate and then take their alternative candidate and their nominations to the Labour Party conference, who have the say over whether there will be a contest or not.
That's the procedure.
And I would say to him, that's the procedure, and I would say to him, if he wants to do that, he has the right to do it and to organise it, but I would urge him not to do it. I think we should all stick together and do what the country expects us to do, which is to deal with this mess over the parliamentary expenses and to get the country through the economic downturn. That is by far and away the most important. Those are the most important tasks that face us.
Lord Faulkner?
I mean, I agree very strongly with what Nick says about the need for a Labour government, in particular for the North East. I agree very strongly that we should stick together. I agree very, very strongly that unity is important. I think where Nick and I might disagree, but I'm more than happy to debate this, is that the best way to achieve unity and to make us an effective force to ensure that the North East does remain, for example, under Labour, is that we have a new leader, because I think unity will only come with a leader that the mainstream will support.
What is it that you think is so divisive about Gordon Brown?
I think if you look at what happened in and around the cabinet reshuffle and what went on before, people who would not remotely be described as people who dissent from Labour, people like Nick Rainsford, people like Barry Shearman, who would not be described as it were, the usual suspects, believe that the future of the party lies with a new leader. And I think that's the way we will get unity.
Nick Brown?
If we fall out amongst ourselves and get ourselves into a position where we cannot work together, then we will do the Labour Party and the country a lot of damage, and it could endure for a long time. There is a way to test the proposition as to whether the majority of the party wants an alternative leader. It's set out in the rule book, and I would urge those who have a different view to mine. I'm a strong Gordon Brown supporter, as everybody knows. But people have a different view, they're entitled to their different view, they need to get their nominations and take the issue to the Labour Party conference if they can.
Nick Brown, can I ask you on one specific point? The part sale of Royal Mail, which Lord Mandelson was supporting, is very contentious with people on the backbench of the Labour Party who don't want it to happen. It's reported tonight by the Times that that's going to be slowed down now. In other words, it's going to be deferred. Is that true?
I don't know the answer to the question because I'm not the Minister in charge of the bill. The Minister in charge of the bill is Lord Mandelson.
But Nick Brown, the Chief Whip, is one of those, Harriet Harman, who was a guest in this studio a little earlier, who argued with Peter Mandelson in a Cabinet subcommittee that should postpone it altogether at one stage, much to the fury of the Business Secretary. So I think, Mr Brown, you'd be one of those who would think it'd be easier to manage the situation if, shall we say, there was a little bit more time? That was a question.
I mean, there is the issue here is the equity sale, or the part equity sale, and we need to find a way through it. I'm strongly in favour of finding a way through it that has the buy-in from the majority of the Labour and trade union movement.
Nick Brown, how long do you think it'll be before this thing settles down? If your argument wins the day, and Labour backbenchers don't actually use the procedure to dislodge the Prime Minister, how long after this? You've got a big meeting on Monday evening of the Parliamentary Party. How long will it be before Gordon Brown can stand as the leader of a united party, in your opinion?
I think we've learnt this lesson the hard way before. We cannot keep a continuing fight going in the Labour Party between those with a minority view and those with a majority point of view. We have to find a way of reconciling that point of view. If push comes to the shove, it's set out in the rule book how to go about it. I hope people don't take that course, but they're entitled to try. But once the decision has been made, it should be settled, and we should all get behind the Prime Minister and the government.
The striking thing is that the rule book, of course, makes it quite difficult for Labour MPs, much harder than it is for Conservative MPs was under Mrs Thatcher to remove their leader. It has to be done in public, it has to be 17 aims. Nick Brown is now talking about taking it to a conference. In other words, they have to risk a major public rift.
Is that something you think that should be risked?
Well,
You seem very sort of sanguine about the whole thing, like as if it was a debating club. Let's have a little debate and then we can decide.
I think it's absolutely critical for the Labour Party. I think it is the way that we will unite. I think unity is absolutely critical. All the things that Nick is saying are so right. The question is, how do you get the unity? Nick is right as well when he says that the rule book is the way that it's got to be dealt with, and Nick Robinson is right when he says that means at some stage there's going to have to be a test as to whether there are 70 signatures supporting one individual at least to make a challenge. If
You don't favour the idea Barry Sheerman put forward of having a sort of secret ballot?
No, I don't think one can change the rules in the middle of the process. I think one's got
Prime Minister could if he wanted to.
I'm not sure he could.
He could do a back me or sack me like John Major did.
Well, he would then have to, as I understand it, place himself before the Labour Party in accordance with the rules.
Okay, stickler for the rules. Do you agree with that?
But also that surely that's the worst thing we could do, because then we really would be going through a period of instability. What we need is firm leadership from the Prime Minister and the Cabinet to get this expenses disgrace sorted out once and for all, and to have it beyond criticism for the future and get on with the main job, which is getting this country through the recessionary forces at work in the economy and out the other side. We have a plan to do it. It needs driving through. We shouldn't be distracted, in my opinion, by internal quarrels.
No doubt you prefer not to be distracted by the European elections either. But let's go on with them now. Thanks very much for joining us, Nick. And we have a look at the European Parliament itself now, and seen through the groupings in that Parliament. The EPP, the European People's Party, and European Democrats of the centre-right, currently on 217, increased of 13. The Socialist Party of European Socialists, centre-left, down 18. The Liberals, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe, on 57, down 12. The Greens, on 45, done well, up 15. The parties of the left, the European United Left as they're called, 29 at the moment, up 3. The UEN, the Union for Europe of the Nations, of the right, parties of the right joined it there, 17, they're down 2. Independence and Democracy, Eurosceptics, 7, they're down 10. UKIP belongs to the Independent and Democracy groups. And at the bottom, this rather curious word, none, if you haven't come across it before, is non inscrit, the people who belong to no group, hence none, on 31, up 10. So let's have a look at the substantial results here. And Dr. Sarah Hobbolt, who's with us, who is a fellow of Lincoln College, Oxford, and a professor of these subjects, will be talking to us in a moment. And Mark Mardell joins us from the European Parliament. Mark.
Hello there, how are you?
Well, I'm very well, thank you, Mark, since you asked.
Well, as far as these results are concerned, it seems that the biggest hit is taken by the socialists. Now, I suppose that there might be several reasons for that. I mean, the dull answer to why it is that particularly in some of the big countries, France and Italy, the left are in disarray for various detailed reasons that are to do with their national politics. In Germany, they've been part of a coalition government with the more dominant centre-right. That, again, domestically, they haven't got people who really appeal. As I say, that's the dull argument, that in 3 of the big member states, the left has just made a mess of things politically, domestically, and so obviously isn't going to reap rewards. But I think it is also fair to say it's quite an unusual result when you're in the middle of a recession where people are suffering, where the socialists all over Europe are making the argument that this is the time to have greater workers' rights and greater protection for people because they're feeling vulnerable, and it was the fault of the free market that this happened. It at least seems that they haven't managed to set people alight by that argument.
It's curious, isn't it, that the economy, Mark, hasn't played such a role. I mean, all these countries are in terrible trouble, aren't they, with a rising unemployment, with banking problems, with car industry going down, all the rest of it. You think they might get slaughtered?
Yes, I mean, some countries are in a worse position than others, but I think the other thing that saves the parties of government, which are of the centre-right, is that in most continental European countries, people don't feel it's their government's fault. They don't feel it's the fault of a system designed by their own politicians. They would say, or many people would say, it was a recession made in America by Anglo-Saxons, by Anglo-Saxon rules. And you've seen that very strongly. I mean, President Sarkozy's campaign, and I'm smiling as I think about it, that was extraordinary. He captured the momentum of the left and switched from saying we must have, as he did in his presidential elections, more American-style capitalism here, to saying we must have a new sort of capitalism, a different sort of capitalism, a capitalism that is more concerned about humanity. So he sort of almost stole the clothes of the left. And I think that people also, again, the Christian Democrats in Germany, in a quieter way, made the argument that the Americans had got it wrong, the British had got it wrong. So I think maybe that they're not taking a hit for that reason as well.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to you later on in the evening, I hope. Emily, how are things looking at the moment?
Yeah, this is the shape of it. It's being updated by the minute, and I'll show you how you can do that at home if you want to as well. As Mark was saying, we're seeing centre-right parties really adding into the EPP there. We're looking at Sarkozy's gains, good exit polls for Berlusconi as well, despite those extraordinary allegations, consorting with minors and all the rest of it. We might return to that later. There's some other stories shaping up here quite well in Europe. Look at Hungary, for example. You can go to any of these countries yourself. Hungary has gained 3 seats for the anti-Gypsy, the far-right party Jobbik, and they will come into the non-Anscri, the no grouping there. Look at how the economy, those countries that have been bailed out by the IMF are starting to push towards their far-right. Those are the stories we'll be looking at as well, and we'll be going to the bbc.co.uk election results. This is something fun for all the family, as we say. You can do this at home. You can see how the countries are shaping up and what kind of gains are really pushing through. But interesting at this point, for example, Spain as well. I think Sarah's going to talk about this. You're seeing the socialists really getting quite badly hammered there, even though we're in the middle of this global recession.
So, Sarah, what's your view of what's going on in Europe outside? We always say Europe as though it was Europe and the UK, which is not what we should do. Continental Europe. What's going on?
Well, it is interesting, as Mark was also saying, that certainly in most of the bigger countries, the centre-left parties are doing badly, and that's very much what we can see being reflected in the overall shift of power within the European Parliament. And you would have think that they would have been able to capitalize on the fact that there's been this financial crisis, which has highlighted a lot of the problems with laissez-faire capitalism. But what instead has happened is that many centre-right parties have indeed taken upon themselves to propose more regulation of the financial sector, to propose more spending in order to deal with this crisis. So the centre-left doesn't really have a platform. They haven't also really, in a sort of European terms, had a real alternative to, for example, the Commission President Barroso, their own candidate or anything. So it's clear that they're in some disarray across Europe.
So if you go further to the left, for instance, France has a new party with a supposedly charismatic young leader who's sort of anti-capitalist, wants to rethink capitalism. How have they done?
And they've picked up 1 seat, the new anti-capitalists in France. It's interesting, we've been talking about the far right a little bit tonight, and in fact in France what is happening is that the Front National, the far right, is doing worse than they were in 2004, and some of that protest vote has gone to the far left. We've also seen in Germany that exit polls suggest that Die Linke, the left party, which is also an anti-capitalist party, they also look like they're doing quite well.
So you have the socialists not doing well, but parties to the left of socialism doing well, because people think that the socialist parties have nothing new to offer and something more radical is needed, or what?
Well, I guess it's also often quite difficult for voters really to see the difference between the mainstream centre-right and the mainstream centre-left. And often what the mainstream centre-right might offer is, for example, the Sarkozy in France, he's offering a more hardline rhetoric on immigration, or that's the same thing with Berlusconi's party in Italy, and that might be appealing to some voters, together with a policy platform of high public spending and promises of more regulation of the financial sector.
What about the far right? Is the rise of the far right continuing?
Well, as I was mentioning, there's a little bit of a mixed picture. In France, we are seeing that, according to exit polls, Front National is not doing. That's, of course, Le Pen's party is not doing as well. But in other parties, in Austria, in Denmark, they're looking like they're picking up extra seats.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to, or come back to the UK and go back to Scotland and join Brian Taylor. Brian, what news do you have that may affect British politics?
Very bad night for the Labour Party in Scotland. The latest estimate of share of the votes is that they are on round about 21% of the popular vote, with the SNP now well ahead of them on an estimated 29% at this stage. Conservatives third on round about 17, 18, Lib Dems fourth on 11 or 12. On the night, the areas represented at Westminster by Cabinet Ministers Jim Murphy and Alistair Darling, well, they would lose those seats. Labour have not taken first place. But of course, as Labour are pointing out, you cannot extrapolate from tonight to a general election, but on the night, very bad result for them. In terms of seats, the SNP certainly hold the two they have and might take a third, but it really is an uphill struggle for them to do that under the European voting system. They have not just to beat the other parties, but outpace them entirely in order to gain that third seat. Scotland goes down from 7 seats to 6 this time around. My guess is that the Tories' second seat will drop off in that process. So you could be looking at 2 for the Labour Party if they can hold on to them. Certainly at least 2 for the SNP, 1 Tory and 1 Lib Dem.
Brian, can I just check with you? What are you saying the Labour percentage vote is down in Scotland? Is it Falkirk only you had?
No, for Scotland as a whole, we reckoned about 21% they're standing at. They were just over 26 the last time, outpolling the SNP. This time around, it's switched entirely. The SNP look like being comfortably the first place party, comfortably first placed, well ahead of the Labour Party. Bear in mind the extent of that. Prior to the Scottish parliamentary elections in 2007, the SNP had never outpolled Labour in terms of share of the vote in a national election across Scotland. This looks like being undoubtedly the second time that's happened, and prior to those 2007 elections, Labour had not lost, in terms of the popular share of the vote, had not lost an election in Scotland for 50 years.
Thanks very much. I don't know whether I should call you Baroness Kinnock already. No, you shake your head. Glenys Kinnock joins us, the new Europe Minister, another peer in the new cabinet. A rather difficult time to join, Glenys Kinnock, with Labour doing so badly all over the United Kingdom, as far as we can tell so far.
Yeah, and these elections, clearly it's a bad night for us, and certainly I'm seeing very valued and respected colleagues of mine in the European Parliament not doing so well. But as of course was suggested just a few minutes ago, we did very badly in the 2004 European elections, but then went on to win the general election the following year. So if we can go head to head with the Tories, then I still think that we can turn things around and that we can still have a Labour government which will be able to deal with the recession, a Prime Minister who will be able to lead us in the next weeks and months ahead.
Was it a bit of a surprise to you to be made Minister suddenly out of the blue when Caroline Flint walked out?
It was a surprise, yes, on Friday afternoon. Yes, it was a surprise, certainly.
You're not window dressing?
No, I don't think I'm window dressing.
Do you have the right to sit in cabinet at all times?
No, not at all.
No?
No.
So
but it's a job that I think is one of the best jobs in government, one where now clearly this election shows we have to work much harder communicating the importance of the European Union in the United Kingdom, not just the institutional issues which we tend to focus on quite a lot, but to get down to actually convincing our citizens that the European Union is extremely important on climate change, on energy, on consumer rights and so many other things.
So just to clarify the point, if Caroline Flint were watching this, have you done any better than her in political terms in getting a seat getting into number 10 and sitting at the cabinet table, or is it exactly as she was?
Exactly as she was, I presume.
See. Right.
It's not anything that I'm overly bothered about. I think I'm extremely pleased and honoured to have been asked to do this job, and I think it's a very important job, and I intend to work very hard and put in place the 15 years of experience working in one of the major institutions of the European Union.
Glenis, thank you very much indeed. Tessa Jowell is here on my right, who was the Olympics Minister, but now is the Cabinet Office Minister, so you are in Cabinet now.
I am.
When you were Olympics Minister, did you feel you were a bit of window dressing and not allowed into Cabinet very much? How often did you sit in Cabinet?
I attended the Cabinet until October last year, and for the last 9 months I've got on with being Olympics Minister, and as we all know, the project is on time and on budget.
It is quite a damaging. It's quite a damaging attack on Gordon Brown, isn't it? That he sidelined the women in his government.
I think
you feel it's legitimate?
No, I don't. I don't think that he sidelined the women in the government, and I don't think women are window dressing. I think that that being in government requires qualities of assertiveness and determination and clarity, all of which Caroline Flint herself has. But I think that if you look at what Labour has done generally, I think it's 29% of our MPs are women. The figure for the Tories is about 9%. We've got to that point, which is still not enough. We've got to go further by introducing policies which are intended specifically to make our Parliament more representative. And as a result of that, as a result of a government with 25% plus women, I don't think we've gone below 25% of women ministers over the last 12 years. And we've seen improved maternity rights, childcare, focus on rape and domestic violence, the sort of issues that are too often neglected if you have an unrepresentative government.
So you weren't tempted to leave and complain?
No, I wasn't.
Thank you very much. Well, we're joined now by Christine Lagarde, who's the French finance minister, first woman finance minister in France. Let's just see the French results. If you could hang on for a second. The EPP, 28, up 11. The Socialists down 13. The Greens have gone up 8. Part of the Left up 3. And the Liberals have gone down 3. And the non-inscrits, the no one, have gone down 6. So let's go back to the main figures just there for a moment. And Christine Lagarde, can you help answer this rather fascinating political mood, which is the parties of the right, like your own, who are in great difficulty over the economy, in great difficulty over rising unemployment, much criticised for what's happening in their countries, seem to have done well, not just in France, in these elections?
Yes, we have done well, actually. And it's a very satisfactory result, and certainly an indication that our campaign was efficient. We talked about European issues. We described what we did during the French presidency of the European Union from July 1st to December 31st. And we outlined what kind of Europe we wanted for the future, which meant less bureaucracy, more politics, the decisions made by the Council and by the Parliament to actually represent the people, to make sure that solutions that were proposed would not be out of the grey bureaucratic skies, but would actually come from the field, from the ground, where it matters for people. And I think that the voters actually recognize that. They also recognize the fact that it's not us supposedly being in difficulty about the economic policy, about unemployment, but it's us being in charge of responsibilities at times that are clearly extremely difficult for all economies because of the financial crisis that we are encountering, which is deploying its effects in the economic sphere and has consequences for unemployment.
Do you mean that you successfully blamed the profligacy of the Anglo-Saxons, in particular the British and the Americans, and got Sarkozy off the hook?
No, I'm not trying to put anybody off the hook or to blame anybody. I'm only saying that at the moment, everybody is in the same situation, trying to fight the crisis, trying to restore new conditions for new growth that will be more sustainable, and trying to maintain as much employment as is possible. And I think that the time for pointing fingers or the time for being off the hook is gone. It's a new time for politics, and one that is actually intended to serve the people rather than serve one's interests.
Do you have the impression that things have reached rock bottom in France and are beginning to improve, or not?
It's difficult to say so. It's clearly, I mean, the decline is settling. In other words, it's not declining as fast, it's not as abrupt as it was, and there are indications here and there concerning particularly the mood that people have, particularly those in charge of investing, which is slightly changing. But, you know, I would not be satisfied with that and only that. It is still time to fight for activity, to fight for, as I said earlier, a new type of growth, one that will not be based on the same parameters, one where profit will not be the only driver, but where we clearly have to share contributions in a different way.
Christine Lagarde, thank you for joining us. But one last point. Alistair Darling's a friend of yours, Chancellor of the Exchequer here. Were you surprised that there were rumours he was about to be dropped? And are you relieved that he remains Chancellor of the Exchequer?
I'm very, very pleased that he remains Chancellor of the Exchequer, because he has represented Great Britain and the interests of the British people in a very, very exemplary way. And, you know, I don't want to make any comment about the domestic situation, but from what I have seen of Alistair, he's certainly a very straight gentleman and one that has, as I said, represented Great Britain at the best that could be done.
Christine Lagarde, thank you very much. So let's have a look then at some of the contentious issues about MEPs. We've talked a lot about the expenses and the allowances of MPs in the British Parliament and how their salaries are low, so they have to have this extra 25,000 or whatever it is. What about the MEPs, Emily?
Yeah, Nick Brown a few moments ago called it that mess. Well, it's becoming quite a contentious issue in Europe as well. Coming into this election, MEPs were earning exactly what they would earn if they were a domestic MP in their own country, and that means wide variations across the member states. Let me give you an example of that. Take Italy. OK, the best paid MEPs in the EU, they get nearly 12,000 euros as a monthly salary. Compare that to a newer member country, a poorer country like Bulgaria, and they're getting just 900 euros a month. Their Italian counterparts are earning 13 times more. Where do we fit into that? As you'd expect, somewhere in between. The average salary there, £65,000 a year for our UK MEPs, the same as the MPs. Now, what happens in future? Well, all that's going to change. They will get a basic monthly salary of €7,665. That's about 92,000 euros a year. Now, just look what this does to some of the salaries. We're going back to Italy. You can imagine a few smiles wiped off the faces of Italian MEPs there. Their salaries go down 34%. The Bulgarians have quite a lot to cheer about. How's this for an inflation-busting pay rise? 752% their salaries will increase by. And look, interestingly enough, at what happens in the UK with those accommodations now. MEPs from the UK will see their salaries go up 24%. Given the heat that this whole issue is generating, you might find that does raise a few eyebrows with the electorate. Well, let's talk to our panel about that. I mean, it's something that's often overlooked, isn't it, the MEP expense and all this. But how do you think that will go down, Polly, when you look at that figure?
Very badly indeed. I think one of the problems about the whole expenses row that's happened here in Britain is that it opened a window into the front rooms of the elite, if you like, the top 10% of the population. And it reminded people who are on, ordinary Britons who are on an average of about 24,000 a year, that their MPs are getting, roughly 3 times more than they earn, plus these huge expenses. And I think it opened up the enormous inequality in Britain, one of the most unequal countries in Europe. And it's part of what explains the scratchiness between the governed and the governors in this country.
I mean, we haven't even got on to the expenses there. We'll have a look at that a little bit later. But do you think if more people were aware of this, there would be more Euroscepticism altogether? I mean, wasn't that poll, you know, they cost us 1.8 million a year?
The fascinating thing is people do think they know this. They're always talking about the European gravy train and they think MEPs have a lot of money and they don't get excited about it. So when this happened with MPs to a more modest scale, people were absolutely furious. It ignited the country. And here, people can't remember the names of the people and they're totally uninterested. There have been various, for example, UKIP expenses scandals. People have even been found guilty of crimes and no one was interested. So I think what it really illustrates is the massive apathy there is about members of the European Parliament compared to MPs.
But also, Steve Richards, that they have sorted this out and it will all change from now. Whether you think it's a better or worse system, at least we're not stuck in that limbo of sort of waiting for reports that will take another 4 months.
It's a better system. I mean, you're getting away from some of those mad discrepancies you described earlier. But I agree with Danny Finkelstein about this, actually, that it's not a significant additional factor because everybody, or a lot of people, work on the assumption that there is this great lavish thing called Europe and they're all up to their necks in it already. So in that sense, it doesn't do that. What has to happen at some point is they're going to have to find ways of addressing the disconnect that already exists. I mean, I'm picking up that the turnout across Europe is lower than ever in these elections. Now, clearly, the MPs' expenses thing here has fueled scepticism about politics, whether in the United Kingdom or Europe. But it appears to be across Europe generally this turnout.
But actually, if you're looking at that, MEP's basic salary now is what, £82,000 or something. Is there anything stopping, you know, your average Labour MP saying, actually, I might sort of hawk my wares the other side of the continent?
Well, I think the idea that MPs are all sort of motivated by exactly how much they earn, the idea that any MP would rather be an MEP is highly unlikely because they feel so distant to the process, and after all, most people have never heard of an MEP.
But actually, they don't sound like they're feeling that connected to their own government right now.
They're certainly very depressed about it. I think Paul is right. I don't think MPs are going to rush off to be MEPs for £20,000 a year, partly because they have to shuttle backwards between 3 different places, but partly because MEPs feel very aggravated, very frustrated by the fact that people don't know what they do, they don't care what they do. In fact, expenses is almost the only thing people do know about it.
I'm glad you ended on that note. We will return to expenses. There's a promise, but for now, back to you, David.
Well, their count goes on, and I don't yet know when we're going to get results. There they are counting in Birmingham, doing the West Midlands. 10%. And the East Midlands are being counted in Leicester, people clustered around the screen. But I don't actually have any information at the moment about when these results are coming through. As you know, for our part, in Britain, we've only had the ones from the North East in. So let's continue, because we're getting some indications of things, which I'll be talking about with Nick in just a moment. But for the moment, let's just stick with what is firm, what we have got, the Polish result. This is the result in Poland. And there are the figures, the EPP, the parties of the right. Poland has 50 MEPs altogether, so it's quite a powerful bloc in the parliament. 31, they're up 15. The Union of the Europe of the Nations, the right, is down 1. The Socialists up 2. And the Liberals down 7. And the Independence and Democracy down 9. And the share of the vote in Poland, this is how that breaks. Up 30%, huge increase. Not a very big turnout. The turnout figure I don't have here at the moment, but UEN go down 2%, Socialists up 4, the Liberals down 14, the Independent and Democracy down 18. So Alan Little is following this Polish result. It's interesting, Alan, because of course it's the Law and Justice, the UEN, that the Conservative Party plans to include in its new grouping within the European Parliament.
Yes, and the Polish electorate have deserted them in very big numbers, much bigger than expected. And what this does for Civic Platform, the governing party, which has won a landslide, which not even they were expecting, it's unprecedented for a party in Poland to get more than 50% of the popular vote. And you have to think now about what that does for the Polish bloc inside the European People's Party. The EPP is the biggest bloc in the European Parliament. Until now it's been dominated by the big countries of the old Western Europe. But now this gives the Poles a much, much more dominant voice. They might even be the biggest single national bloc within the EPP. They might take the leadership of the EPP and the chairmanship of the European Parliament. So as a result of this vote in Poland, the European Parliament and the EPP in particular is going to be speaking with a much more Polish accent. The centre of gravity in that important bloc has moved to the east. And if you look at it from a British point of view, the Civic Platform Party, which has won such a resounding landslide in Poland, is much more like the British Conservatives. It's not driven by this Euro-federalist super-state building agenda that the Conservatives associate with the French and Germans. And I spoke earlier this evening to the Foreign Minister of Poland, who was saying he wants to appeal to David Cameron to reconsider his decision to leave, to pull the Tories out of the EPP. He wants the British Tories in there because he identifies very strongly with their values and their approach to Europe. And he's saying that this Polish group, together with the British Tories, can be a real force for change inside the European People's Party, and that is quite a challenge, I think, for the British Conservative Party.
Well, the British Conservative Party, in the form of the chairman of the party, Eric Pickles, is sitting here. What do you say to that? That they want you to stay with the EPP because you can make a substantial difference?
Well, I'm a friend in Civic Platform. Know them very well, but we're forming a new group with our partners, the Czech Civic Democrats, and we'll be announcing other partners to come up. The big difference between us and EPP is that we don't support a federal Europe, and we feel that we made a very firm pledge that we would leave the EPP. Of course, we're going to cooperate with any centre-right parties, but we will be announcing, and I can't give a rooming commentary between our different partners, but we will be announcing our partners over the next few days.
If you're persuaded that Law and Justice, who you're thinking of going in with, was in fact, as people claim, anti-gay, homophobic and racist to some extent, would you reconsider whether you would join with them?
Well, remember, Labour sits on the same group on the European Parliament with a leader that praised Hitler. The Liberal Democrats sit on a group with a group that's anti-gay. So
you don't mind, in other words?
No, I didn't say that. What I'm really saying is...
Well, you are saying you don't mind if you're just saying other parties do it.
No, I'm not even close to saying that. What I'm saying is that the groupings within the European Parliament do have some very difficult people in. The only partner we've announced is our Czech. We haven't announced any others.
So, I mean, you may have to hold your nose a bit in putting this thing together.
No, we will not have partners who are anti-gay. We will not have people that are extremists. We're applying a slightly different standard to our colleagues in the Labour Party and our colleagues in the Liberal Democrats.
So if you apply higher standards, you may have difficulty getting the 7 countries together that you need to form a new grouping.
Well, I'm not going to do a running commentary. We're very confident that we'll be able to produce a new party within the European Parliament. Negotiations are currently taking place and we'll announce them. But I'm not going to take you into exactly what the makeup's going to be until it's announced.
Do you think it's going to be difficult, Nick?
Well, I think they can get the 7 countries. I think William Hague said they could get the 7 countries. I think the truth is that if Mr Hague had been honest, he would tell you that when he became Shadow Foreign Secretary, he said to David Cameron, do you really want to do this? Why on earth would you want to do this? It's not worth the hassle. And the truth is, many Conservatives think this is good domestically. It assuages parts of the Tory right. It maybe gives them something to say to the UK Independence Party, but they're quite alarmed about what it means in the signals it sends to European partners. Now, what Mr Cameron tends to say is, well, look, if I'm Prime Minister, they'll talk to me anyway. The difficulty is the day-to-day business, as it's done in the European Parliament, works through these groups. They're not really known here. It doesn't cause a huge problem with voters here because people don't know these groups, but that is how business is done in the European Parliament, so it will pose some difficulties.
You don't think voters last Thursday were thinking, Tories are going to move out of the EPP, I'll vote for them?
My sense is it wasn't a big topic down the dog and duck.
That's my sense as well, I have to say. Exactly my sense, yes.
I think we don't need to do an opinion poll on that particular question.
I'm told the East Midlands is half an hour or so, I treat these with some caution, away from their result. They're being counted in Leicester. There are 5 seats in the East Midlands this time round. It was where Robert Kilroy-Silk fought for UKIP before he left UKIP to form Veritas and then fell out with them and has disappeared from the political scene at the moment. But he gave UKIP 26% last time round. They came just second, only by a whisker second, to the Conservatives. So we'll see what happens to the East Midlands. It'll be half an hour or so before we get it.
David, just some signs already in those areas the UKIP vote has gone down a long way in each of the areas that we've seen in the East Midlands so far. We get them in council by council and you could already see the decline.
So Kilroy's revenge.
Kilroy's magic, if it was ever magic.
Kilroy was charismatic for a month, but it was the wrong month so far as the Conservatives were.
Let us join Jeremy Vine and see what he's got for us.
Well, I'd take you to, I would love to pursue the thought about the East Midlands, which we may do later on, but let's go to Scotland because I think we're seeing something quite remarkable there. Now, just set the scene first of all. If we look at Edinburgh, there are 5 MPs that Edinburgh sends to Westminster. Edinburgh South, South West, West, North and Leaf, and Edinburgh East. And so we can go in. There's a slight complication with the Scottish votes because they were done on a constituency basis last time and councils this time, so I can't give you an exact comparison. But let's just bring Scotland up on the map here on our touch screen, and we'll go to Scotland and we'll go to these local areas, and let's have a look at Edinburgh here and just see what's happening. I can only show you the share in 2009 because, as I say, there's a comparison problem. But have a look at this. SNP on 21% in Edinburgh. Now, these are the votes counted through Edinburgh Council, so there's 5 MPs looking nervously at this. By the way, 4 Labour and 1 Lib Dem. SNP leading there, but also you can see second place here, the Conservatives on 19% and Labour driven into third place in Edinburgh. You'd call that a Labour stronghold, 18% for Labour there. Let's take a look at a different place. Why don't we go to Fife here? Because, of course, Fife is the council that covers the constituency of the Prime Minister, Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath. And again, we'll try and look at share in Fife, and here we go. 27% for Labour. Well, first equal place with the Scottish Nationalists, also on 27%. So they're really breathing down the Prime Minister's neck in his own constituency. And that represents, we think, a change of about 9%. We put some of these figures in and compared them with the vote 5 years ago. So 9% swing to the SNP, really surging forward. And one more for you. We'll do Falkirk here as well, because we think we're seeing now an 11% swing from Labour to the SNP. So let's give you those statistics as well. SNP 36% and Labour they're on 24%. So what we're seeing here, a very, very powerful performance in some areas from the SNP in places where really Labour should be a clear first.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Well, we're joined now by Michael Meacher, who I see is up there in Oldham with curious Euro symbols floating behind you, Mr. Meacher. I want to address domestic politics, though. What do you think ought to happen?
Well, let's see what these results show. Clearly, it's going to be a very bad night for Labour. I think everyone's been expecting that, but we don't actually know the results yet. And if you ask why this has happened, I would have said that it is basically for 3 reasons. One is, of course, the recession, the impact on jobs, on mortgages and homes, and on increased insecurity. That is very, very widespread. That is something I have to say that I think Gordon Brown has probably done as much as anyone else in the world to try and to deal with. Secondly, of course, the horrific political expenses scandal, which is really horrendous, and that has clearly caused an unprecedented surge of anger. And I fear that Labour, as the incumbent government, the incumbent party, is probably, and perhaps unfairly, suffering most from it. But we all take responsibility for it. And the third reason, I think, is that the government simply has not, at the moment, been doing enough for its own supporters. There is a widespread perception that the government is not looking after its own voters, and they are gradually walking away or sitting at home. And that's why, when you say what's going to happen, I think, just as in the case of the expenses scandal, things are so bad that it is now opening up a real prospect of something very positive, namely major parliamentary democratic reform. So if Labour voting goes down to a nadir tonight, as I fear it might just jerk all of those who are responsible for policy into a fundamental reappraisal and a redirectioning of the party in a manner which I hope and believe can bring back Labour voters.
Do you believe that, as Lord Falconer said today, that can you get, I quote him, can we get unity under the current leadership? I'm not sure we can. I think probably it will need a change in leader.
Well,
do you agree with that?
No, I don't. My view is that it must depend on policy. This is not about personalities. I mean, one of the things that offends me very greatly about this awful week we've just been through is that it has been entirely about personalities, nothing about policy, nothing about ideology, nothing about vision, nothing about the direction which the government and the party ought to take. That's what we ought to be talking about. If you are going to change a leader, what different policies does that leader stand for? And in my view, I think one needs to look at what is going to have a real impact on our voters. First of all, keeping the Royal Mail fully in public hands, which I think is very, very important. Secondly, a very big, massive programme of building social housing, which I think is probably the biggest repository of misery in this country at the present time, the lack of it. Thirdly, dealing with inequality, which Polly Toymer was mentioning earlier. The fact is, Britain is now the most unequal country in Europe.
All right.
And more unequal than it was under Mrs. Thatcher. Yes,
right.
We've made
Thank you, Mr. Meacher. That's a list. We can't let you go on with items 1 to 10, but we've got items 1 to 3, and I'm grateful to you. And I put them to Tessa Jowell. First of all, we've got to keep Royal Mail fully in public ownership. Are you prepared to do that as a government?
Nick Brown has already made clear that the bill will come before Parliament. I think Peter Mandelson has indicated that he is in negotiation. He's obviously listening, taking seriously the reservations of some backbenchers. I know of no proposed change to the policy, but
what does that mean exactly? That it's going to go through, or going to be forced through, whipped through, or not?
No, I don't know, David.
Oh, I see. So as far as you're concerned, it's going on.
The bill at the moment is in the Lords. It will come to the Commons, but I know that the ministers who are concerned with the bill, Pat McFadden in the Commons, Peter Mandelson in the Lords, are having a lot of discussion with backbenchers, and also looking at the potential for delivering the policy. But the important thing is that Royal Mail has to be viable.
The key way out for government on this, maybe, if they want to assuage Labour backbenchers but not back down on the legislation, is to claim that they can't quite do it at this time because the market conditions are not good. There were already suggestions that some of the companies involved were not as keen as they once had been, so it'd be very easy to kick it to the long grass, David, without actually abandoning the legislation.
The other thing that he mentions is that under the Labour government, the country has become more unequal than it was under Mrs. Thatcher. One knows what Michael Meacher's talking about and suggesting. Is there anything, do you think, on that score? Higher taxation? We've already got 50% taxation.
No, I mean the taxation, the tax levels have been set in the recent budget and in the Finance Act. What I think is important is looking at all the very practical ways that evidence shows us of how you reduce inequality, and this critical link between skill, employability, the rapidly changing nature and structure of the labour market is one of the very important
One
ways
other
of
brief
doing
point. John Prescott complained about the campaign that Labour ran for this. Make no mistake, he said there was no campaign. Where were Harriet Harman, Caroline Flint, Douglas Alexander and Hazel Blears? And Alistair Campbell said he agreed with Prescott. It was hard to disagree. There was no proper campaigning by Labour.
No,
Very briefly, true or false?
No, that's false. There has been a campaign, but I think everybody would recognise that the European election campaign is usually the hardest to galvanise our activists behind. But certainly in my own constituency, our activists work very hard indeed.
We'll have a result in a moment from Italy, but in the meantime we go to Leeds and join Len Tingle, Yorkshire and the Humber result coming up, and we have rumours about a possible BNP gain there, Len. Is that right?
Well, there are 21 areas where they're counting here in Yorkshire and the Humber. 20 of them are in so far. We're just waiting for the City of York to come back. But what is apparent is that the Labour vote has been squeezed very, very hard indeed. You have to remember that here there are 6 seats, 2 held by Conservatives, 2 by Labour, 1 by Liberal Democrats and 1 by the UK Independence Party. It's looking very much as though Labour have certainly lost one of those seats. It then depends, where does that seat go? Looking at the figures in so far, it could well be that UKIP, who look as though they're going to come second in this region, could maybe get that second seat. But the figures are really too close to call. It could be that that 6th seat goes to the British National Party, the far-right British National Party, a major breakthrough here in what is traditionally seen as a kind of Labour heartland.
Do you think, before we get that central result in, New York result in, which will let you go, give us the full results?
Well, we're expecting the full result to come in about 10 or 15 minutes. But already the Conservatives here are saying that they think the British National Party have got that 6th seat. William Hague has been quoted as saying that this is a major political mistake and it's something that we, presumably we meaning all politicians, will have to correct.
Eric Pickles, do you take the blame? William Hague says all politicians are responsible for a BNP gain.
Absolutely. I mean,
in what sense?
This is the part of the world that I grew up in, and what has essentially happened is there's been a retreat from a number of the areas, particularly by Labour, but we haven't been able to fill that particular vacuum. As you probably know, I've been working on this area for a long time in anti-BNP, making sure we had candidates up, making sure we had a strategy. But what seems to have happened is that Labour's vote has been squeezed beyond what we thought was possible. And and the BNP has been a beneficiary of that. I'm not pleased about that.
Do you think people have, just very briefly, who vote BNP are voting racist deliberately?
No, I don't. I do not believe that for a moment. I think it's a suggestion of disenchantment. And if we actually suggest that everybody who votes for the BNP are racist, then the BNP themselves win.
Duncan Kennedy joins us from Italy. We'll come back to the Yorkshire and the Humber as soon as we get that result in. But Duncan, what's the story from Italy? How's Berlusconi we've all been enjoying the scandalous rumours about his cavorting with young women and this and that and the other by the swimming pool and flying in jets hither and thither. It makes Labour and Tory party expenses seem small beer. But how has it been going?
It does. By my reckoning, there have been 4 scandals involving Mr. Berlusconi in the past 5 weeks. He's had one spat involving his wife over a divorce. He's been alleged to have had some sort of relationship with an 18-year-old woman. That morphed into a scandal about pictures, photographs of half-naked people at his villa in Sardinia. And the latest one is him allegedly misusing government aircraft to ferry those guests to his villa in Sardinia. And yet overall tonight, it looks as though he's going to come out victorious, and a healthy victory at that. We haven't quite got our results in yet. One exit poll had him around 40%. He said if he got anything like 40%, it will be a victory for him, and it will be, because he and the opposition were turning this into a referendum on his leadership.
Thank you.
We have a result coming through, Huntingdonshire. Well, if that was a declaration, my whatever it is a Chinaman. Somebody just testing the microphone, I think. Let's go back to you, Duncan.
I'm just saying that despite all those scandals, there isn't really much of an opposition here, and Italians just like Silvio Berlusconi. His personal popularity ratings have been in the 60s and 70%, figures that Gordon Brown can only dream of. He's just very comfortable with the Italian people. The Italian people are very comfortable for him. He's by no means perfect, and I think he'd be the first to admit that, but they're comfortable with him, and they don't see much of an opposition in sight. So it looks like he's going to come out on top tonight with a very comfortable majority.
Thanks very much. One interesting thing, Germany and France, we had these results through very quickly, I think on opinion polls. Is that not happening in Italy? How's it done? Duncan, I'm still with you. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, what was the question?
Well, we've had Germany and France, big countries. We haven't had Italy. Do they use opinion polls, or exit polls rather, to announce the results, or are they actually counting the results and then producing the MEP figures?
It's a little bit of both. We've had one exit poll which gave Mr Berlusconi around about the 40% figure and his nearest centre-left opposition around about the 30% figure. But yes, they are counting. We're expecting our first results through actually in the next sort of half an hour or so. 20, 30, 40 million people out voting. They're thinking about a turnout here of between 60 and 70%. So a lot of people have gone to the polls today. But yes, in terms of exit polls, people are being very cautious about them. A large margin of leeway. It looks as though he's going to come out on top fairly comfortably, but people are waiting for the actual result to come through.
Well, thanks very much indeed. Sarah Hobble, you were there a moment ago, but now you're here. Nice to have you back. While we've been talking British politics, what's been happening in Europe?
Well, what's interesting, one thing is interesting when you look at the Eurosceptic vote. Of course, as we were talking about earlier, Euroscepticism has played a big role in certain campaigns, but overall it doesn't look like the Eurosceptic vote is really up across Europe. In certain countries such as Austria, the Eurosceptic parties have done well. In Denmark they've done well, but in other parties, particularly in Eastern Europe, in Poland, they've in fact done worse than they have done previously. So there's not a sort of pattern that there's a rise in Euroscepticism. A lot of people have talked about that because of the referendums and the constitutional treaty in France and the Netherlands in 2005 we produced no votes, and also in Ireland, but it's not really translating into a rise in the Eurosceptic vote.
What do you call Eurosceptic? I mean, do you call the Conservative Party Eurosceptic?
No, what's interesting is, of course, that by moving away from the EPP and saying that that they will form a new group, very much because they're not aligned with the European People's Party on that issue, they're certainly taking a different line from the mainstream governing parties in Europe, which is more pro-integration. So, skeptic about Europe would probably be fair to say, although not anti-European, of course.
And as a student of European politics, how effective do you think the group that the Conservatives are trying to put together is likely to be?
Well, it's interesting because the groups in the European Parliament are indeed the sort of powerhouses where things are decided, and therefore the Conservatives have been criticised for leaving the European People's Party. But in some ways it might be a good strategic move because, of course, if you're in a big group, even though the EPP is a powerful group, but you're a marginalised player within it because you have a different view on certain issues, having a group where you're more aligned ideologically, and where you can be the top dog, the major player, might be a clever strategic move for Cameron.
We have the East of England result coming through now. Thanks, Sarah. We'll just see this from St Ives in Cambridgeshire.
Seven of you.
Though curiously it says Huntingdonshire behind. Eric Pickles, St Ives, Huntingdonshire.
Indeed, yeah.
Yes.
It's Cromwell's birthplace.
Yes. We call it Cambridgeshire, but we think it's...
No, David.
So there are the candidates. I don't know whether you can spot your man, Mr. Pickles, there.
I can see all three of them.
There are three Conservative MEPs, one Labour, one Lib Dem, and two UKIP at the last election.
Region held on the 10th of June 2009 declared that the number of votes cast for each party is as follows. And what I'm going to do now is read out all the names of the parties with the total number of votes cast for them right across the region. Animals Count, 13,201. British National Party, Protecting British Jobs, 97,013. Christian Party, Proclaiming Christ's Lordship, 24,646. Conservative Party, 500,331. English Democrats Party, Putting England First, 32,211. Jury Team, 6,354. Liberal Democrats, 221,235. No to EU, Yes to Democracy, 13,939. Pro-Democracy, Libertas EU, 9,940. Socialist Labour Party, leader Arthur Scargill, 13,599. The Green Party, 141,016. The Labour Party, 167,833. United Kingdom First, 38,185. United Kingdom Independence Party, UKIP, 313,921. Independent, Mr. Peter Rigby, 9,916. And the total number of rejected votes right throughout the region was 13,164. I therefore hereby declare that the following candidates have been duly elected for the Eastern region, and I will read them out in the order of the D'Hondt method of calculation from 1 to 7, and I will also read out the party. Geoffrey Charles Van Orden, Conservative. David Campbell Bannerman, UKIP. Robert William Sturdy, Conservative. Andrew Nicholas Duff, Liberal Democrat. Richard Stewart Howitt, Labour. Victoria Grace Ford, Conservative. John Stuart Agnew, UKIP. I also give notice that I've prepared a statement setting out these details as required by Rule 56 of the European Parliamentary Election Rules 2004. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that does
no change then in the MEPs returned from the east of England. 3 Conservative, 1 Labour, 1 Liberal Democrat, 2 UKIP. The share of the vote will be the one to watch here. Absolutely no change in the Conservative vote, absolutely no change in the UKIP vote, absolutely no change in the Liberal Democrat vote. Labour goes down 6, the Greens go up 3, and the BNP go up 2 percentage points, and others up 1. So the Labour Party has lost 6 points, Eric Pickles, and you've gained nothing from it. How's that?
Well, I think it's another example of how the D'Hondt system works. You don't get much change in any of this. BNP did put quite a lot of effort into Eastern region because it only required 10% to get a seat. And so that's actually quite a good result. And there was some suggestion earlier in the week that they might have got that final seat.
But wouldn't you have expected something to have come to you? I mean, you're the party strategist and all these things, and you know how these things work. You're not surprised, not disappointed by no improvement in
I'm not surprised
at
all in Eastern area. I wasn't expecting any big variations. I'm expecting some big variations in the Midlands, particularly in East Midlands.
Well, we're joined now from Manchester by the new Health Secretary, Andy Burnham. Mr. Burnham, thank you very much for coming in. Some people thought you might have left the government by now. Instead, you've been promoted.
Yeah, not me, David. I'm a Labour loyalist to the core, and I think also the Prime Minister is doing a great job. I'm fully behind him, and right now we need to pull together as a Labour Party, and that's where my instincts are.
What do you make of the decline in the Labour vote that we're seeing? Everybody attributes it to the row about expenses and allowances, but that's something that would affect all parties, of course, and in many ways the Tories had the worst of that in the headlines, the duck houses and the moats and all that. So it doesn't seem to wash that it's just Labour that's being punished. Why is Labour being punished?
No, I don't think it is just Labour that's feeling the effects of it, David. I think the party of government does face a particular effect from any situation like this. So I think it is normal that the party of government would feel more of an effect than others. But I thought the point that you were just making to Eric Pickles a moment ago is important. I don't think the Conservatives are breaking through in the way that they should be if they really had the momentum. I think what we have just come through, though, is perhaps certainly the lowest politics at the lowest ebb that I could ever remember it in my time in Parliament. And it's not surprising, therefore, that these elections we are seeing people expressing their dissatisfaction with all of the mainstream political parties, and understandably so.
Do you think the BNP are going to pick up a seat in the Northwest?
Well, I sincerely hope not. And, you know, I think it's fairly finely balanced, to be honest, David. I've been looking at some of the votes, the numbers coming through, and it's deeply uncomfortable to see the BNP polling the numbers that they are. You know, what we have to do, all of the main parties actually, is together communicate why they are never the answer. Whatever the country's problems, the BNP are never the answer to those issues. But equally, and I accept my responsibility here, to go out and connect with those voters and to ensure that mainstream politics is providing them with the answers and the policies that they're looking for.
David Miliband, the Foreign Secretary, said it'd be a day of shame if fascists went to the European Parliament. And I'm sure you would agree with that. But what do you think you can do? Where has it gone wrong that the BNP have risen at all? Unless you think that there is a very strong anti-immigration, pro-Caucasian feeling among those people who vote BNP, that they want to see an all-white Britain.
I think it's not quite like that, actually, David. I think there's been an anti-politics mood for some time, actually, and we've seen the growth of some of the fringe parties. And in many ways, particularly in areas in the Northwest, you know, the BNP is like the ultimate protest vote. It's how to deliver the establishment, you know, the ultimate protest, a two-fingered salute, if you like. So I think largely it's an expression and a comment on Westminster politics, and it's that feeling we've got to work hard on, and all of the work we're doing following the last month in Westminster to ensure we have a political system that has people's respect, then really that is the answer.
It's a curious answer, because it's just people are completely indifferent to the racial issue and the racial overtones of the BNP.
No.
It's as though in Germany you said, oh, the Nazi Party, right, well, it's just because people are discontented.
No, I think the BNP have got very clever at hiding their core beliefs, their racist beliefs, and you know they dress differently, they act differently, they campaign differently these days.
Well, they still don't allow black people to join the party. It couldn't be more clear than that, could it?
No, of course not. And to be honest, David, you know, the immigration issue is playing in their favour, and they're exploiting it ruthlessly at a local level. But you know, this is a party, in my view, that just has no place in British politics. But all of the main parties, we've all got to accept our responsibility for taking them on. And you know, I think this is where we all do come together. And you know, it's where we come together with the church leaders too. And you know, we've got a job on our hands now. But we've all had a role in seeing Westminster politics drop in people's esteem. So we've all got to work together to put it right.
Andy Burnham, thank you very much. We're joined now from Scotland by Alex Salmond, the leader of the SNP. He's in Glasgow tonight. Mr. Salmond, what's the drift of things for the SNP in Scotland? We have a swing of 11% reported to you in Falkirk. I don't know whether that's correct or not. What's your information?
Well, yes, it is correct. Not so much a drift, more a surge upwards, David. So we're having a very, very good night indeed, although the last Scottish result in the Western Islands won't be declared until tomorrow morning. But it looks very, very exciting. I mean, this will be only the second time in the last half-century, the second time that Labour have been beaten in a national election across Scotland. The first time was 2 years ago in the Scottish elections. That was a very narrow result. This one looks like a comprehensive victory.
So you think you're going to top the poll with Labour in second place?
Well, and some distance behind, you know, pushing 10% behind. I think we're on pushing 30%. They're just over 20% at the present moment. Now, there's a lot of results to come in, of course, but it looks a fairly comprehensive victory. Now, I think the importance of that, it rather belies the theory that people are voting against incumbency. I mean, the SNP are the government in Scotland, and yet that doesn't seem to stop us being substantially endorsed by the people. So whatever else is happening, this is not a vote against government, because the government in Scotland is getting a resounding endorsement.
Well, what about the impact of the things that every Labour minister talks about the dismay in the country as a whole about what's been going on at Westminster on the allowances and the expenses, is that I know the Scottish Parliament operates a completely different system, but the MPs at Westminster that live in Scotland are living in the system that people are so critical of, aren't they?
Well, it's undoubtedly been a factor, and people have passed judgment on it. I think you're correct to say that one of the themes that's emerged in Scotland has been how the Scottish Parliament is a model of openness and transparency compared to the Westminster Parliament. Now, it wasn't always the case. I mean, that change came about in 2003 when the then presiding officer, George Reid, forced through changes which meant that everything in the Scottish Parliament was placed on the internet, everything was open and transparent, and of course that's put the Parliament in a very strong position compared to the shenanigans which have been going on at Westminster.
Mr. Salmond, is Nick Robinson here in the studio. The question that will be raised by Labour is whether, frankly, this gives any indication of what will happen in a general election at all. They'll say that they've done badly in Euro elections before. Why on earth should it matter when it comes to either the Scottish Parliament or indeed the general election?
Well, all elections matter, Nick, and certainly if these results were repeated at the general election, then we'd be sweeping away dozens of Labour MPs in Scotland. That sounds quite a good prospect to me, so roll on the general election and I'll be down in the House of Commons to vote for one on Wednesday.
We've also got, I think, waiting to join us, Charles Kennedy at the Count, and he's in central London. Mr. Kennedy, are you with us?
I hope so.
Oh, good, you are. I don't mean it in any other than the sense of, are you wired up?
I think I'm wired up. I can hear you anyway, David.
Excellent.
Good evening.
Excellent, that's what matters. Good evening. At the moment, your vote is running down a bit from the last one, down 1%. Disappointment. Why has that happened?
Well, I think what you've seen in these elections, for all the reasons that you've been discussing in the course of the coverage so far tonight, is that there's been, if you like, an anti-politics feel about things, largely fuelled, obviously, by what's been going on at Westminster with expenses, partly against the backdrop of the economic recession. That makes it volatile, and this system of elections is particularly vulnerable to that. But actually, equally, if you look at what happened with us 5 years ago, we came in about 15%, and that actually led us on to the best general election result, which in the Liberal tradition at Westminster level we'd achieved since 1922 in the days of Lloyd George. So I wouldn't be unnecessarily discouraged from our party point of view at all about what's been happening so far.
Are you concerned about the trouncing that the Liberal Democrats got in the southwest, in Devon and Cornwall, Devon and Somerset?
I certainly wouldn't describe it as a trouncing. I think that if you look at the overall turnout, we probably suffered a bit by less people going to the polls. I think in certain areas, some of those county councils, we suffered just by the longevity that we had actually been the party in administration over quite a number of terms. That's inevitable when the incumbency factor works against you. But if you look at what we've been able to detect so far from these European results, and indeed what was clear last Thursday, Friday morning as well, it is that where we've got established strength in parliamentary constituencies that we're either defending or indeed that we're looking to advance in, it's very encouraging from a Lib Dem point of view. We're more than holding our own. Now, I think that is a very good way in which to move forward for the remainder of this Parliament, however long or short that proves to be.
Thanks very much indeed. We've got Yorkshire and the Humber. The declaration is imminent, we think. The 6 seats being counted in Leeds. We'll be there the moment it comes. Nick Robinson?
Signs that are pointing towards this possible BNP gain in Barnsley, in Leeds, in Rotherham. You're seeing significant increases in the BNP vote, up almost 9% in Barnsley, up 3% in Leeds, 6% in Rotherham.
We'll get that as soon as we can. In the meantime, Emily, you and your gang, how are you making it?
Yeah, there's such interesting points being raised now. If the BNP could tonight secure their first seat in a European Parliament, I mean, the question surely, Danny, is at a time of recession, if you were going to go for extremists, why wouldn't you choose communists rather than fascists, if you like.
It's a fascinating feature of these kind of crises of capitalism that people often move towards the right at the moment when the left thinks it's its great moment. And I anticipated, actually, and you can see it not just in the results for the extreme right, but also in this movement towards the centre-right as well. Across Europe, the left has done poorly at a moment when you would expect...
Danny, just hold on right there. Hold that thought. We're going to go straight to Jeremy Vine, who I think has got some results on exactly this subject, the BNP. Jeremy.
I'll give you some specific figures, yes, Emily, on the BNP's performance in two different areas. It's very difficult to work out a pattern because, as you'll see, it's so different. So if we go just to the touchscreen here, and I take you to Yorkshire, first of all, and we look up again the council areas where these counts are happening, which give us a bit of focus here on Barnsley, first of all. Let's look at the share in Barnsley in 2004. And there it is. You can see Labour 42%. And then it's UKIP on 14%, and then right down the bottom here, the BNP on just 8% of the vote. This is Barnsley European elections 2004. Let's have a look at the share 2009 now. So bear in mind, BNP were on 8%. What are they now? They've more than doubled. You can see up there to 17%. So they have more than doubled their share of the vote there. And Labour have gone down from 42% of the vote in Barnsley 5 years ago to 25%. So their vote has really been slashed there. I'll take you to the northwest, if I can, as well, to show you a contrasting picture, again involving the BNP. And as you mentioned, this is Burnley now, so you're talking about this. And of course, the significance of Burnley is that on Thursday in the local elections, Lancashire Council, that was where it was Burnley West, I think, that they got their first county councillor in the party's history. Let's go to Burnley's 2004 share and see how the party did 5 years ago in the European elections. And there you can see British National Party on 17% up there. So how are they doing now? We'll just take it down and show you the figures, the fresh votes that we've got coming in now. And you see that they've gone from 17 to actually 15%. So they've been rising in some areas, dropping in others, Emily.
Yeah, what do you make of that, Polly Tommey? Why is Barnsley doing that?
I think that it's very alarming. Right across Europe, you're getting these extreme right-wing parties doing rather well. And I do think it is the immigration question. I think that what's happened even in the last 5 years in terms of immigration within Europe, huge movement from Eastern Europe right across to other countries.
This ought to be the time that they leave. That stops being an issue, isn't it? I thought all the East Europeans were now thinking we can make more money at home.
I think that you've still got large areas that never had masses of Polish speakers, Polish children in schools, Polish delicatessens. And, when jobs are under pressure, people always turn to immigrants first as one of the reasons. And undoubtedly, the truth is, it has to be one of the reasons that in lots of areas where you get very bright, highly educated, highly skilled people coming in from Eastern Europe, in areas where there's high unemployment and rising steeply now, it's not altogether surprising.
Polly, we're going to go straight back to David with more results. Sorry to cut you off like that.
Oh, thank you very much. I wish I knew where they were. I think Yorkshire and Humberside. Let's go over there and get this first result, and we're watching out for the possibility of a BNP victory.
I, Paul Rogerson, being the regional returning officer for the European Parliament election in the Yorkshire and the Humber electoral region held on the 4th of June 2009, hereby declare that the number of votes cast for each party is as follows. British National Party, 120,139 votes. Christian Party, proclaiming Christ's Lordship, 16,742 votes. Conservative Party, 299,802 votes. English Democrats Party, 31,287 votes. Jury Team, 7,181 votes. Liberal Democrats, 161,552 votes. No to EU, Yes to Democracy, 15,614 votes. Pro-Democracy Libertas.eu, 6,268 votes. Socialist Labour Party, 19,380 votes. The Green Party, 104,456 votes. The Labour Party, 230,009 votes. United Kingdom Independence Party, 213,750 votes. I therefore declare that the following candidates have been duly elected for the Yorkshire and the Humber electoral region. Edward Hugh Christian Macmillan Scott, Conservative Party. Linda McAvan, the Labour Party. Godfrey William Bloom, United Kingdom Independence Party. Diana Paulette Wallace, Liberal Democrats. Timothy John Robert Kirkhope, Conservative Party. Andrew Henry William Bronze, British National Party. I shall now invite the successful candidates to say a few words.
So the British National Party have won their first seat in the European Parliament, Andrew Bronze for the BNP, and it's at the expense of Labour, who go down one seat since last time round in Yorkshire and the Humber. Again, therefore, for the BNP, one lost for Labour, and there'll be a lot of explaining to do for Labour and the other parties there, since they all blame themselves for it. And in a moment, I hope we might get the share of the vote. Need to be a little bit cautious about this, because Yorkshire and the Humberside last time round was elected by postal ballot, and therefore the turnout was greater. Some of these figures have fallen. They may not have all fallen at the same rate, because this time round there was no postal ballot. Only if you applied for a postal ballot, you couldn't get one automatically. We don't have the share in yet. Andy Burnham, in Manchester, you were saying that you were nervous about the possibility of one being elected in the northwest. There's a BNP member elected for Yorkshire and the Humber. Your reaction?
Yep. Well, it's a sad moment, David, in my view, in British politics, but I wouldn't want to just explain away why people have voted for the BNP. I mean, clearly there are concerns about immigration. The government has got to respond to those concerns, and we have to understand why people have voted for BNP and ensure that the mainstream parties can win those people back. I think it is a sad moment, but it should just redouble our determination to take them on and take them out of British politics. But it's not a good night for anybody who campaigns against racism in politics. They wear suits, but they're at heart, that's the kind of party they are.
We've seen them making headway in local elections. They're now making headway in the European Parliament. Do you think they'll make headway in a national election, in 11 months' time, or do you think they'll fade away there?
Well, it was quite interesting, David, the result you read out from Burnley not so long ago, which was where voters have seen evidence of the British National Party in local government, their vote has gone down since 2004. So, where the novelty wears off and they see them in their true colours and the kind of people they are, then, it quickly they lose, they lose faith and they lose support. So, it's going to be a long job. As I say, we've got to understand and connect with people as to why they voted for the BNP and never just dismiss why they've done that. I certainly wouldn't do that. But painstakingly win them back to mainstream politics, and that's what all of the main parties, I think, have to do. But it is a sad moment, in my view.
We have the share of the vote now from Yorkshire and the Humber. Conservatives on 25%. No change in the Conservative share of the vote. Labour down 8%. UKIP up 3%. The Liberal Democrats down 2%. The BNP on 10 percentage points, up 2 percentage points. The Greens up 3 percentage points. English Democracy up 1 percentage point on 3 points.
What's interesting, we're seeing dramatic drops, nevertheless, in the number of votes. Because this was all postal ballot last time, you see that the Labour Party's vote has dropped by about 183,000 in that region.
Are you suggesting there's a differential fall as between Tory and Labour because of the abolition of postal ballots?
Well, there's something going on there, but what's interesting for people who are worrying about the growth of the BNP, their vote is actually 6,000 less than it was last time because of this switch to all postal ballots to what it is now, but they've got enough of a share of the vote in order to take a seat. I mean, it's interesting that Nick Griffin, the party...
I mean, if everybody stops postal balloting, they all have to go down to the polling station. You expect the BNP to be affected just like Labour, just like the Conservatives were. They all went down.
What a lot of the opinion polling is showing is that the willingness to vote, as a percentage of those people saying that they have a preference for a particular party, it is the extreme parties that have the greatest willingness to vote. In other words, they think it is worthwhile getting out to vote. It's also true not on the extremes, but on the margins of UKIP. They are keener to vote. Conservatives are the keenest to vote amongst the main parties at the moment. And so you see this differential willingness to vote is there. But it's for people who are worried about the BNP, they will be deeply, deeply depressed that the BNP have any representation in a parliament or an assembly at all. But their actual number of votes is lower than it was 5 years ago.
Mark Francois, Conservative Shadow Europe Minister, is here with us. What's your reaction to this BNP victory?
Well, I'm very sad that they have gained a seat in the European Parliament. But I am pleased that we kept both of our seats, that Edwin Macmillan-Scott and Timothy Kirkhope have been re-elected. And I'm also pleased that our share of the vote held steady. It would appear that the BNP have taken the seat mainly at Labour's expense. They had 2, they've now only got 1. And Labour's vote share is down 8%, and we held our ground. But I do think it's a disappointing night for British politics that the BNP have been elected.
How do you think the BNP should be counted?
Sorry, do you say counted or counted?
Counted.
I think we have to. I think we have to expose what they believe in. I think we have to make clearer to people the kind of racist policies that they really advocate. I think we have to work harder to try and get that across. But I think Labour have a particular challenge because it seems as if the BNP have been elected in this region largely at Labour's expense.
What if the people who vote BNP are racist, do want an end to immigration, do want voluntary repatriation?
I'm not saying for one moment that the people who voted for them are racist. I think they voted for them partly out of frustration.
How do you know that? People always say that, but it's very clear what the BNP stands for, and yet the bigger parties like you and the Liberals, Liberal Democrats and Labour all say, oh, the people who vote, don't blame the people who vote for them, they don't support the BNP. How do you know they don't support the BNP?
Well, I suspect when the dust is settled, a lot of research and analysis will be done into exactly what is laid behind the result. But I think it is clear that the BNP are a racist party, but I think we have to work harder to get that across to the general public.
I hope we may be able in a moment to hear Andrew Bronze, the BNP speaker, the BNP elected MEP, that is, speak. When I say I hope, I mean in the sense that technically I hope we may be able to go over for it. We will in a second, but we have another victor speaking for the moment. Nick.
What's interesting, and I think is not widely known, is the degree of cooperation there was between the three big parties ever so quietly to try and counter the BNP. There was an agreement that parties would try to put candidates in areas where they knew they'd be slaughtered, because the more candidates there are, the harder it is for the BNP to get elected. There was quite a lot of behind-the-scenes cooperation amongst parties to say it is better that people vote for anyone other than the BNP. It hasn't proved to be enough in this particular case, and that will raise a debate about what more can be done then by mainstream parties.
What you're saying in Yorkshire and the Humber, the main parties put up more candidates than they otherwise would have, or they got all sorts of little parties to put up?
No, the main parties. In other words, there are areas where the Conservatives wouldn't have a prayer, they might not care about, for their own party's interests, about putting up a candidate. It helps to counter the BNP, though, if more candidates are put up. Ditto Labour in other areas.
Do you buy this argument that people who vote BNP don't support the policies of the BNP on the whole?
Oh, well, there's evidence that some of the people you talk to on the streets do indeed share the anger about immigration, but they don't necessarily share the detail of refusing membership to black people or repatriation and so on. So they may share some of the frustrations that are exhibited by the BNP, but not the specific racist policies of the BNP.
Andrew Bronze, the new BNP MEP, is just coming to the podium.
Again, I'd like to thank the returning officer and his staff. I think that the way that this monumental task was carried out was an absolute credit to him and to every one of his staff. I don't think I need to tell you that my election is not universally popular in this room. I've heard a rumour that Mr. Brown is thinking now that we might do with this election what they did with the Irish referendum, and that is to call another one and possibly another one until they get the right answer. That's democracy in the 21st century. If you're disappointed with my election, you might be disappointed to be reminded of the fact that I'm actually a government and politics teacher. And I first came across Mr. Daunt's name, the inventor of the voting system, as long ago as 1977, when it was first mooted by Mr. Callaghan when he was Prime Minister. And I like to pride myself that I'm one of the few people who actually understand it. And I was trying to explain it to my colleagues earlier about multiples of 16.6 and whether or not we were going to be nearer to 16.6 or whether somebody else was going to be nearer to a multiple of that. But anyway, those are the rules. And in fact, when the BBC asked earlier whether we were counting on a seat, I said, when we entered this election, we accepted that elections are run by rules. If I won it, I'd be very pleased, but if I didn't win it according to those rules, then I'd be equally pleased, because I accept that the rules of elections must be followed to the letter. Now, I don't think it's something that's been withheld from people that the onslaught against us during this campaign has been more than against any other party in this country in recent times. Much more than it was against the old Labour Party when it really was Labour in the early 20th century, much more even than the Communist Party during the period of the Cold War. But somehow we've overcome it. Despite the fact that I've sometimes opened newspapers and thought, well, I'm not going to vote for them, and then suddenly realised they were talking about us. But despite the lies, despite the money, despite the misrepresentation, we've managed to win through. They might be able to slow us down here, they might be able to slow us down there, they might be able to stop us from achieving one objective, but they won't stop us from achieving the next objective. But ultimately, party objectives are not what all of this is about. I regard this as the first step towards the United Kingdom, the British people, getting freedom from the European Union dictatorship. Thank you.
So that's Andrew Brons, the new BNP and the first BNP member of the European Parliament. And Nick, you have some background on this man.
Well, it's interesting. He's described on the BNP's own website as a veteran British nationalist. When you look at it, I've got a leaflet here, which appears to be a leaflet from when he stood for the National Front many years ago, in which he said that he was willing to go to prison if anybody forced him to allow black people into a National Front meeting. Now, I haven't checked that with Mr. Brons, but it is on a website that appears to come from the National Front. He was a member of something called the National Socialist Movement, apparently, until he was 17, which was a group that was formed on Adolf Hitler's birthday. So there are a number of allegations made. Mr. Brons may, of course, want to have his own
lecturer, isn't he?
He was a lecturer in politics. He's retired now in Harrogate. He's got a very low-key sort of bank manager-ish style, has he not? But his speech, in a sense, fits with precisely the electoral guidelines that we've seen coming from Nick Griffin's BNP. Play low-key, wear a suit, sound as if you're talking mainstream, focus in these elections on Europe and not on race. There's quite a lot of suggestions that there may be more to Mr. Brons than he perhaps is putting on display there.
On Wales, which we're about to get a declaration, do you have any more? There was a rumour going around that the Conservatives might have come top of the poll. Is there anything to substantiate that?
We haven't got that firmed up. We did
No.
hear both from our own Wales political editor as well as rumours from the Count that that was the case.
Perhaps Mark Francois knows. Have you had any information about Tories in Wales?
I've heard that we're doing reasonably well, but I can't confirm that we've topped the poll.
I give you one example that's coming from other Conservative sources. I have to say that I'm being sent that in Wrexham, that the Conservatives have topped the poll for the first time ever. So little signs there that that prediction about the Tories topping in Wales is correct.
What I do hear is that we've actually top the poll in a number of areas where there are marginal seats we would hope to gain at the general election. I can say that, but for the overall result for Wales, I think we still have to wait just a couple of minutes.
Let's just turn back for a moment to Europe. Sarah, you've heard that result of a BNP, first MEP in the BNP, extreme right party. The rest of Europe, any progress to the far right?
Well, we see progress in quite a few countries, very notably, of course, in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, Geert Wilders' party got 4 seats this time. This is the very same man who was barred from entering Britain earlier this year because of his anti-immigration, anti-Islamist rhetoric. He's called the Quran a fascist book. And he's currently being prosecuted because of his statements about Islam in the Netherlands. So he's a very controversial figure that came in. He came in second only after the Christian Democrats in the Netherlands. So that's more votes than most likely the BNP will get today in Britain. So that's just one example. We have other examples across Europe of the far right doing well.
Let's go to Wales, because they're just coming onto the platform there in Haverfordwest, where the count is. And we will hear how the 4 seats in Wales are allocated. Currently 1 Conservative, 2 Labour and 1 Plaid Cymru.
Bryn Parry-Jones, being the regional returning officer for Wales at the election of members to serve in the European Parliament for the electoral region of Wales, held on the 4th of June 2009. To hereby give notice that the total number of votes recorded for each registered party in that region is as follows. British National Party, 37,114. Christian Party proclaiming Christ's Lordship, 13,037. Conservative Party, 145,193. Jury team, 3,793. Liberal Democrats, 73,082. No to EU, yes to democracy, 8,600. Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales, 126,702. Socialist Labour Party, 12,402. The Green Party, 38,160. The Labour Party, 138,852. United Kingdom Independence Party, 87,585. The total number of ballot papers rejected was 3,128, and I do hereby declare that the undermentioned are duly elected as the 4 members for the said electoral region. Kay Swinburne, Derek Vaughan, Jill Evans and John Andreas Bufton. I shall now declare in Welsh. Bryn Parry-Jones.
So that's Conservatives 1, Labour 1, Plaid Cymru 1 and UKIP 1. There's the change, and all important for the British scene is the share. Now look at that, the Conservatives in Wales for the first time since, I think, 1931.
1918, I'm
1918 you have, well, you can go back even further if you want. The Conservatives come out top in the European elections. In Wales, 21% share, up 2 percentage points. Labour down a whacking 12 percentage points in Wales. That's really, really bad news. There are 29 Labour MPs in Wales, far outnumbering Conservative or Plaid or Liberal Democrats. Plaid goes up 1%, UKIP goes up 2%, the Liberal Democrats flatline on 11% and don't get an MEP. And the Greens go up 2 and the BNP goes up 3. But the sensational story from Wales is, of course, the top two parties there, the Conservatives going up 2%, top of the poll, and Labour going down 12%. 20% of the poll.
I think what's striking there, David, and it may be my memory that's letting me down, but I don't remember an expenses row specifically about Welsh Labour MPs. Now, the story that we've been hearing from national politicians of the Labour Party has been that it's been particularly the expenses scandal that's hit them, and it may be that the national scandal is affecting people all over, but it is intriguing to find out why that particular collapse in Labour support is happening.
So why Wales is the question. Emily?
Yeah, interesting to look at why Labour is hitting these extraordinary new lows. We'll look at Wales a bit more, but also when you look at Labour coming not just third place or second place, but fourth, fifth, even sixth in the southwest.
So I think Wales is part of a pattern, and the results today are part of a pattern, which is what we're seeing here building up is a massive informal coalition against Labour. It's sort of anything but. And I think the significance is that this has been going on for some time now. I remember after the 2006 local elections, I remember Labour won the general election a year before, people saying to me, out on the doorstep, there is a massive anti-Labour feeling. People were doing anything to get Labour out. That was when Tony Blair was still leader. Now, Gordon Brown came in with the intention of trying to turn this round. It has worsened in a way that is, in capital letters, as it worsened. These are disastrous results. And it reminds me of the 1980s when there was an informal sort of anything but Labour feeling around, and of course in a different way in the late 1990s, mid-1990s, when it applied to the Conservatives. And this, unless they can turn this round, as I say, it's a phenomenon which started some time ago and has just developed and intensified big time tonight.
Yeah, Polly, I mean, it's that idea of any name on that ballot paper except for Labour. It's not a spoiling, it's not a staying away from the polls, it is a proper kicking.
It's an absolute punch to the solar plexus to come second to the Conservatives in Wales. Wales is a cradle of the Labour Party. If you think of all of the political traditions of Wales, you think of how much of Labour was nurtured in Wales, you think of the world of the Kinnocks, for instance. It is unbelievable, almost unbelievable that the Conservatives can come top. And it's results like this, in Cornwall coming 5th, 6th, that are really shattering. To get only 11% in the whole of the east of England. I mean, there are some results here that are really quite staggeringly unexpected.
And Danny, when we say, of course, this is what European elections do, this is what local elections do, we can't ever infer anything in a big picture from this.
No, that's not true. I think this is a massive personal victory for Michael Foot this evening. He has emerged as not the greatest loser in Labour's history. And these results are substantially below what the Conservative Party was achieving before it received its biggest defeat since 1832, and Labour is underperforming that by a long way. And more concerning, I think, is as well as going low in Wales, they're also getting wiped out in whole areas in the southeast tonight where they would expect in an election at least to put in a showing. So they're going to find it difficult to recover from these sorts of defeats. And again, as I said earlier, you have to take these things seriously. And if the Labour Party thinks these aren't real results because it's only a European election and UKIP are doing really well, I think they're fooling themselves.
Why is Wales turning to the Tories then?
Actually, what was really happening was that Wales was turning away from Labour. And this does bring into question whether all these seat projections, which people always put on opinion polls, are correct. If people are really turning to anyone but Labour, this could do what happened in 1997, which was that the opinion polls were very bad for the Tories, the proportion of the vote were very bad for the Tories, but the actual seats were a disaster. And that's what's happening this evening. The seats or the areas are doing even worse than the projected polls.
And I know it's always tempting to bring it back to this leadership question, which is dangling over the whole night, if not the whole week. But will there be people now in the Parliamentary Labour Party saying, OK, that I was prepared for bad. This is uncharted territory. What is it? First time that the Labour Party failed to come first in a nationwide election in Wales since 1918. Are there people now saying, I think I might just start resharpening the knives?
Well, even now, I'm still not entirely sure whether that will be the response. In other words, these are so bad that from a few hours ago, Brown appearing safe in the short term, he is now vulnerable because there is the second question of what happens then. And I still think that second question counters these appalling
Who is? I said Ramsay MacDonald's furious.
We'll leave it. We'll leave it somewhere in that century. Just go back to David right now.
I'm joined from Manchester by Nick Griffin, leader of the BNP, and Andrew Bronze from Yorkshire, elected as an MEP. Mr. Bronze, could I start with you? We heard your speech a moment ago. The politicians of the main parties say people vote BNP without endorsing what it stands for, purely as a protest vote, not because they believe in your racist policies, not because they believe in an end, they believe in voluntary repatriation, not because they support a party that will only have whites in its membership. Is that true, or do the people who vote for you endorse all those three policies?
At least the people who vote for us know what our policies are. In the case of the Liberal Party, they know nothing about them at all. They just vote for them as a protest vote. In the case of UKIP, they believe, they're under the mistaken impression that UKIP actually wants to get us out of the European Union. In fact, some UKIP members, and indeed UKIP MEPs, have said that they don't. They only want to reform it.
Nick Griffin, you're a racist party in the sense you won't have black people as members. You'll only have those of Caucasian background.
Would you interview someone from the Black Police Officers Association and say that because that's for blacks, they're racist? No, you wouldn't.
Could I finish my question to you, please? This is a country that's becoming increasingly multiracial, with mixed marriages between people of different colours, of all colours. How do you decide when somebody qualifies as a Caucasian who can vote for your party and won't be asked to consider voluntary repatriation?
Well, voluntary repatriation is on the agenda right now, paid for by the Labour Party. It's been on the statute books since 1972, and it is available to people of ethnic minorities. It's not, for instance, available to white Ulstermen or white Irishmen or their families wanting to go back to their islands. So at present, there's actually a bias in favour of non-white, non-Indigenous people. So, there's racism there. What we should be talking about is why we've been elected. And I can tell you that in huge parts of South Yorkshire, there is a problem with racism. There's overwhelming racism against the native Indigenous peoples of these islands, the people who have always been there, the people in the pit villages, who are put to the bottom of the heap by the government, put to the bottom of the heap by local councils, and whose plight and problems are consistently ignored by the mass media. That's why we've done so well. It's ordinary, decent people in Yorkshire kicking back against racism, because racism in this country overwhelmingly is directed against people who look like me.
Do you think that the people who vote for you in Yorkshire, and we don't know about whether you've won a seat, I don't know what your view is in the Northwest, do you think they vote for you knowing all that and believing that you'll kick out the people who've come in from abroad in favour of the people who live there? Is that why they vote for you?
We're not talking about kicking anybody out other than illegals and bogus asylum seekers who should be removed under due process of law. But as far as we're concerned, everyone who's in this country legally, contributing to our society and not wanting to transform it into something else, something alien, something undemocratic, unchristian, everybody is welcome. And as a matter of fact, we've had quite a few, particularly Sikhs in places like Bradford. They vote for us because they understand that this country has a serious problem with radical and aggressive Islam spreading amongst young Muslims, and they see we're the only people who dare to talk about it.
So if that's your view, why don't you let those people join your party? I mean, you take their vote. Why can't they join your party? Why are you a whites-only party?
Okay, well, there's a couple of reasons for that, and I hope you'll let me finish. First of all is that at present, if an employer tries to sack someone because they're in the British National Party, we can use the Race Relations Act to defend ourselves. So when employers and local councils and government stops trying to persecute our people for their political beliefs, then we can look afresh at our membership policy. The second key factor is at the moment, we're living in an enforced multiracial society where successive governments, Tory and Labour, use vast amounts of taxpayers' money to put non-whites at the head of all sorts of queues. Those different ethnic groups have all sorts of groups standing up for their interests. You can't even register an English charity, it's illegal. Someone has to stand up for the majority Indigenous population of this country just to get a level playing field. When the ruling elite give our people a level playing field and play fair with the British people, then we will readdress our membership policy.
Have you won a seat in the Northwest, or did you choose the wrong spot?
It's simply too close to call. It's within a couple of thousand votes.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you very much.
Jeremy Vine's got a look at Wales, that sensational result in Wales with the Tories coming top of the poll. Jeremy.
David, yes, we can look at the map. They've changed the counting system in Wales, so it's difficult to compare with last time, council by council, but we can compare with the entire nation of Wales and see what happened here. So let's get the touchscreen up and have a look at Wales here, and just take a look first of all at 2004 and the share of the vote. So you see there Labour in first place, 33% of the vote in 2004, Conservatives on 19%, and Plaid Cymru on 17. And just a bit of context here, 40 constituencies, Westminster constituencies in Wales, and 29 of them Labour at the last general election. So 29 constituencies out of 40 Labour at the last general election. If you go back to 1997, you find Labour winning 60% of the vote in Wales. So this was 5 years ago. This was Labour on 33%. Now we'll go and see the share you've just been discussing, the new share, and see just how badly Labour has done here. So from 33% to, well, you can see it, down to 20%. So they're 13% down. Conservatives, as you say, in first place here with 21%. And worth pointing out, a little bit disappointing for the Welsh Nationalists here, who've just gone up 2%. Plaid Cymru will get a seat out of that. Whether or not they, well, it's possible, I suppose, they could actually take a seat from Labour, because Labour have crashed so much there. But they haven't moved forward dramatically. But the story from Wales is very, very worrying for the Labour Party, because this is real Labour heartlands territory we're talking about.
Very much, Jeremy. Oh, well, go on, you say, because you were just muttering, having heard. You think this is very good for the Tories?
Well, as I
What's going to happen in Wales at a general election?
Well, as I understand it, this is the first time we have ever beaten the Labour Party outright in Wales. This really is quite a development. Also, it's the first time that Labour have ever lost in Wales since, as Nick says, 1918. And as I was saying, on these results, we would win 12 seats in Wales at the general election. And if that were held up, if that followed through, and I think that's really quite remarkable.
It's remarkable if it followed through, but it's not going to, is it? I mean, in the sense that the turnout is much lower.
Well, we shall see. But
election
what you can't deny is that tonight, when the votes have been counted, we've beaten the Labour Party in Wales for the first time ever. That's undeniable.
I think the interesting thing, David, Steve Richards in our panel over there was beginning to wonder as well about this, was whether the shock effect of some of these defeats will change the dynamic of the debate about the Labour leadership. Because we said in advance, well, people have discounted how badly Labour will do. They know, they've seen the opinion polls. If you're in Wales, forget whether you're in this studio in London, if you are a member of the Welsh Labour Party and you see the Tories beat your party for the first time since 1918, that is of a completely different order in terms of effect. If you're in Yorkshire and you see a BNP representative elected, this has an effect that cannot be estimated by simply reading polls in newspapers and saying, doesn't look terribly good for us, does it?
So 29 Labour MPs may be back in Westminster tomorrow saying, what on earth has gone wrong in Wales?
That's right. Now, of course, they may not blame Gordon Brown at all, and they may say, in fact, he is the best person to deal with it, and a change of leadership would make no difference. But what I'm arguing is it moves from a Westminster Village debate about which minister said what and whether they resign or what, to saying, in my patch, looks what's happening to my party. And that is a much, much more serious debate for individual MPs to have, and a wrestling with their own consciences, which will make tomorrow a rather more interesting than it looked a few more hours ago.
A look at the Irish results. Remembering Declan Ganley was standing, he opposed the referendum in Ireland very successfully against the government on the Lisbon Treaty. This is the change. Now, these, of course, are not Irish political parties. EPP, the party of the right, down 1, the Liberals up 3, the Socialists up 1, the Left up 2, and the Independents down 1, and the UEN down 4. A substantial drop there.
The UEN is down 4 because that is Fianna Fáil, the governing party that was in that group and is now moving to the Liberal group. So this is really the worst result for Fianna Fáil in decades and decades. This is the governing party that has been in power, like the Labour Party here in this country, for 12 years, with Brian Cowen as Prime Minister of Ireland. And this is really disastrous results. But for a positive note for the government, it looks like Libertas is not winning a seat. So the no vote, the leader of the no vote, no to Lisbon Treaty vote, will not be winning a seat. And that will be good news for the next referendum on the Lisbon Treaty.
And briefly, the gainers there are Sinn Féin.
And and Libertas, the party of Declan Ganley, which I was talking a moment ago, got 4%, below the 5% that shows up on our figures. He's with Mark Simpson in Castlebar. Mark.
Well, it looked as if it was a very bad night for Declan Ganley here in County Mayo. As you say, he's the leader of the No camp, the anti-Lisbon Treaty camp here in Ireland, and he came fourth in the first count, and this is only a 3-seat constituency, so it looked as if it was game over for Declan Ganley. Then there was a dramatic halt to proceedings. They haven't had a second count here. What on earth is going on? Declan Ganley is with me. Now, you live to fight another day here. There's now going to be a rechecking of the votes.
Well, first of all, this is a proportional representation system here, so it's not like a first past the post as if you come fourth, because what they do is the candidates that are eliminated, they redistribute their votes. So there are big chunks of votes there, over 40,000 in some cases, that will be reallocated, and we would expect to pick up a lot of those votes, particularly from the No to Lisbon side, which was, for example, Sinn Féin, and some of the Labour allocation as well, because our tally people were telling us that the number twos there were breaking very well to us. But what went on this evening is that the returning officer decided to have a recheck of the bundles of votes. The votes are bundled in bundles of 10,000 each, because we've 4 eyewitnesses that felt that there was possibly some human error late in the evening with the allocation. You can see these bundles here and the way that they're piled up. Those 2 piles there to the right, which have, I think, 70,000 votes or so in them, they were filled by, and at that point, by about 6:30, 7 o'clock, we had 2 bins of votes and other votes still being counted at that time, and they didn't end up there. So we think that there may have been a misallocation just through human error of some of those. So there's a recheck in the morning.
So let's cut to the chase. In terms of transfers, everyone else told me that you had no chance of getting in on transfers. Do you now have a chance of getting in because of this misappropriation of votes?
Well, I'm not saying that there was a misappropriation of votes. This is the returning officer that has decided to do a recheck in the morning. But the transfer situation, absolutely, there is a decent chance, because the transfers, particularly if you take the Sinn Féin transfers, we would do, and we were doing pretty well out of them, our tally people that were checking, because that was a No to Lisbon vote as well. Not in places like Galway and Mayo, but the border counties were transferring pretty decently to us. And in the Labour, the majority of the Labour Party had voted no as well. They seem to be transferring well to us.
It's very complicated, but the bottom line
PR is complicated.
You live to fight another day, and
that's true.
This count will continue again at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Declan Ganley, thank you very much. Back to London.
A reminder of what happened in Wales. Here is the share of the vote in Wales. The Conservatives came top of the poll in Wales at 21%. Labour was pushed into second place, 20%, down 12 points. Plaid Cymru third, 19, up 1. UKIP 13, up 2. The Liberal Democrats flatline at 11. The Greens went up 2 and the BNP went up 3. We joined Betsan Powys in Haverfordwest, which is where the count was done.
Thank you very much. Yes, well, I've heard a few figures bandied about, but let's be clear, Labour haven't failed to win the popular vote in Wales since 1918, and back then, of course, it wasn't the Conservatives who topped the poll, it was the Liberals. Now, there had been predictions that the Conservatives would do well here, but this well, they've won Wrexham, they've won Allen and Deeside areas they really hadn't predicted themselves that they would take tonight. So a question I've heard asked in the studio tonight, why Wales? I'll put it to the Shadow Welsh Secretary, Cheryl Gillen. Why Wales?
Well, I think we've seen tonight a historic moment when we topped the polls and Welsh Conservatives moved ahead. I think people in Wales are thoroughly fed up with the Labour Party. The Labour Party has taken people in Wales for granted for an awfully long time. We've been working steadily under the leadership of David Cameron, Nick Bourne, who leads in the Assembly, and I, as the Shadow Secretary of State for Wales, with a terrific team, have been moving forward at each and every single election. And I hope we can show the people of Wales we really have something to offer. So I'm delighted with the result tonight, and I hope that it's hard work and the fact that we are now working to win the trust of the people in Wales.
Derek Vaughan, congratulations to you on winning your seat, but I doubt whether you're feeling that victorious. There's a statement from Rhodri Morgan and Peter Hain tonight, a pretty hasty one, but it says these results are very bad for Labour. Above all, we've got to listen to the message that the public in Wales is so clearly giving us. It's vital that Labour remains united and begins rebuilding trust. Had you expected results this bad tonight?
Well, we knew it was going to be difficult for the Labour Party. You know, we've been in power a long time, we're in the middle of a recession. Of course, recently we've had the MPs' expensive scandals, and being the party of government, you know, there was no doubt that we were going to bear the brunt of that.
But you had not predicted this, had you?
Well, we knew it was going to be difficult. We fought a very, very hard campaign, and what's happened at the end of the day is the Tories have just pipped us, and I congratulate them.
They just pipped you. They've pretty much beaten you by some 7,000 votes, haven't they?
They've just pipped us. But what's happened is when you look at the turnout and the votes tonight from the constituencies, you will see that Labour voters have stayed at home.
You have no seats. You haven't won in any seats outside Glamorgan and Gwent. In other words, a small part of South East Wales. That's where you're left tonight.
You know, and in those areas, some of our co-voters turned out, but in other areas, it hasn't. And that's because people are disenchanted. They're disenchanted because of the MPs' expensive scandals. They're disenchanted because of the situation we find ourselves in with the economy. And it's up to the Labour Party to put that right over the next few months before the next general election.
And this talk here about being united, does that mean that Gordon Brown should stay?
No, that would be daft for the Labour Party and daft for the country. You know, Gordon Brown is the man of substance, with experience, the knowledge and the ideas to get us through these difficult times.
So that he should stay. But one final question, Cheryl Gillen. I mean, what has happened here tonight has certainly been dramatic. What does it mean, do you foresee now, for the general election? I mean, is it a one-off election because of the period we've had?
Oh no, the Conservative Party in Wales will keep working steadily for every vote in Wales. We will continue to build up our support right across. We won seats tonight that we didn't think we were going to win, but we had worked towards winning. So our message to the people of Wales is that we will try our best to represent you, and we will move forward at every election.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say you hadn't expected it, because we certainly hadn't. But thank you both. Back to London.
We've got the early papers in. I mean, they can't know any more than we know. But anyway, the Daily Mail said rebels plot one final strike, crashing to a historic low of around 20% and beaten by the UK Independence Party. Well, we shall discover what happened there when we get the share proportion. Judgment day for Brown, says The Guardian. And Brown doomed, says the Daily Star, if you can take their word for it. And the Financial Times, Labour suffers crushing defeat. Brown prepares for a showdown with MPs. We are waiting for the overall national share to come through from these results. Not quite the same thing as the actual results in the 12 regions, but enough to give us a guide to the national share. And that will give us a guide to how successful David Cameron may be, or what the challenge he faces is, Emily, won't it?
Yeah, if the Tories are feeling pretty giddy about what's happening in Wales tonight, then it's probably a good time to recall that mantra that it's easy for Labour to lose the next election, it's difficult for the Tories to win. If that sounds like a contradiction in terms, let me show you what it actually means in numbers. Here's the maths. 650 MPs at the next election. If these numbers don't look familiar to you, it's because they've been adjusted to account for boundary changes. Just bear that in mind. This is the starting block, if you like, for the next general election. Where are we? Well, the key number from 650 is 326. That's the winning post, as it were. Labour on 349, Tories on 210, 62 for the Lib Dems, other 29, which gives Labour that majority of 4,839 more seats than the Tories. The first thing that David Cameron has to do then is strip Labour of that majority. To take them back away from the post, the Tories need a swing of 1.6%. That means 24 seats just to get there. The next thing they need to do is become the biggest party. Now they're beating Labour. That takes a swing of 4.3%. They need another 48 seats, MPs, just to do that. And there's still a big gap between them and the post. To become that overall majority party, look where they are. OK, this is another 44 seats, takes a swing of 6.9%, and they've still actually only got that tiny majority of 2. So how feasible is a 6.9% swing? Let's just put this into some kind of historic context for you. These are all the general elections from the war, 1945 onwards. And if you look, this is your 6.9% swing line from Labour to the Tories, and it's only been crossed twice. Once, 1945, Clement Attlee comprehensively beating Churchill just after the war. That was a swing from Labour of about 11% to Labour, I should say there. And here, of course, Tony Blair, that historic victory, 1997, 10.2 swing. Those are the only times it's been crossed. This is the one you might be focusing on. that historic first term for Margaret Thatcher, 5.3% swing. She didn't cross that line. So David Cameron still needs to do something not impossible, but certainly historically pretty difficult if he actually means to walk through the door of Downing Street at the next election. Let's see what that means. It is bigger than we think sometimes, Danny. I mean, looking at tonight, how doable is that?
Absolutely, and if you talk to David Cameron, he'll often talk about that and how big the challenge is and how many results it's possible for the Conservative Party to get, which don't get them all the way there. It has to be said that if the swing required is unprecedented, so are some of the results we're seeing tonight, and so is the behaviour of the Labour Party in the run-up to these elections. So there's a lot of unprecedented things. You can imagine them certainly getting that swing. But it does require enthusiasm for the Conservative Party as well as dismay about Labour, and that I think will be the thing that Conservatives are worrying and considering this evening.
That's the point, because actually in that year leading up to 97, there was consistently high pollings for the Labour Party, which have not particularly been translated this time round.
Absolutely, the Conservative Party
We were talking 50%.
The Conservative Party blew it in a very big way for a very long time. And now I think that it's begun to do some of the right things, but it's still got a lot of ground to make up with a lot of people who worry about a Conservative government. It does seem as though the Labour Party is doing extremely badly, and the challenge for Cameron is to get enthusiasm for the Conservative
Polly,
Party.
my job here tonight is to constantly remind everyone this is not a general election, this is a European election with everything that implies. And yet, is there any sense of that sort of fervour, the 97 fervour, from what you're seeing in some of the early stuff we've been talking about?
In a sort of pro-Cameron sense, no. But I think what Labour will be looking at, they went out tonight with all of their ministers saying this is going to be a terrible night, it's going to be disastrous, terrible, awful, dismal. All of them have said that. But I don't think any of them actually thought it would be anything like as bad as it looks as if it's shaping up to be. I mean, it looks as if it may be that Labour fetches up with something like 16% of the vote. This is unthinkable. I mean, this is appalling. And I think tomorrow morning, when those Labour MPs wake up, they've got their crucial PLP meeting tomorrow, they've got to decide if they've got the will to live or not.
Yeah, Steve, I mean, can you spell it out any more clearly? If people are watching this and saying, what part of the Labour Party does not understand that Gordon Brown must go, what would be your response?
Well, there are two things. First of all, everything's out of sequence, isn't it? We're getting these... Remember, these votes were cast on Thursday amidst one cabinet resignation already happening and speculation he wouldn't be able to form his cabinet. As I said very early on, about 25 hours ago, one element of the new equation is he formed that cabinet after these votes were all cast. That cabinet is locked in. There will not be a cabinet revolt. Now, that's one thing. The other thing is this. What Labour MPs have got to decide is very, very tough, because an act of regicide, which is what it will be. We know he's determined to carry on, and I bet he will be in spite of these results. Always traumatises a party. Leadership contests very rarely solve anything. Look at the Conservatives, who in 1997 had a series of wacky leadership contests which were symptoms of their crisis and made it worse. Yeah. And in Labour's case, as a Cabinet Minister put it to me tonight, this is no great endorsement of the current situation, but the alternative would be there's no candidate. Alan Johnson has said he wants to be Home Secretary now, and they would then have to call an early election.
And
so
we haven't
it's
had anyone
really
come
complicated.
forward.
It's not really true about having to call an early election. It's what the Labour whips have been saying to the MPs to frighten the life out of them.
This is
actually it's not true at all.
I'm so sorry. This is the perfect place to pick up as soon as it is all warming up. We will pick up right here. Remind me I said that. But for now, I'm having my arm twisted across the studio floor. David.
Not by me. Not by me. And saying you'll pick up where you left off is a hostage to fortune.
It just means you have to come back to me at some stage.
We're waiting on a couple of results. We think we're going to get London and the southwest region next. The northwest, slightly mysteriously, where we were talking to Nick Griffin of the BNP, we're waiting to see whether they pick up a second MEP seat, has gone a bit quiet for the moment. Let's have a look, though, at Labour and how they've done in the United Kingdom. I talked to Nick Robinson, our political editor, about what he thinks the impact of this will be. Labour, total MEPs 4, the change down 2. But this is the key thing. Their share of the vote running at 17% at the moment, and the change 9%. And then in Wales, down 12% their share of the vote on 20%, and they lose one member of the European Parliament. And in the northeast, shares 25%, and the Change down 9%. Yorkshire and the Humber, so there's a pretty regular pattern here. They're down 8%. The BNP took up one of their MEP seats there. And finally, the eastern region, the Change there slightly less, down 6%. Their share 11%. So, Nick Robinson, what's this going to mean for Gordon Brown come Monday?
Well, I
come
think
tomorrow. Indeed, almost come now.
Now, very soon,
12.
in the next few hours. I think what we've seen before now is a debate about the Labour leadership that, first of all, preceded the verdict of the polls and preceded the judgment of individual Labour MPs. It was essentially about the leadership of the Labour Party and whether ministers would stay in his cabinet or not, whether they would precipitate a change of leader or not. Now, the movement now is towards individual Labour MPs. Many of them over the weekend took the view that if the Cabinet didn't have the guts to overthrow him, why on earth should we put our heads above the parapet? The only reason this might change things is they will start to look at their own individual situations. What are the prospects of them surviving? What's the prospects in their region of the Labour Party thriving, or in their country in Wales, for example? Now, as I've said before, this doesn't necessarily mean that you move Gordon Brown out, but I think Labour MPs will be a little reluctant to say, oh, look, the Cabinet have sorted this all out now, it's absolutely fine, when it looks as though they may well come third nationally and lose in a whole series of traditional Labour areas.
We can have a look at that now, because if at the local elections the projected national share is what we wait for, which tells us how disparate county council elections would turn themselves into a national poll, with this one we get a predicted share at the end of tonight of the vote in the European elections. And John Curtis, our professor from Strathclyde University, who works on these things with his team, has now come up with this prediction of the vote share in the European elections of 2009. Jeremy Vine has the figures. Jeremy.
David, I will give you this prediction of where we think the night will end up. One important rider, we haven't really got enough results from the southeast of England yet, and that is the most populous of all the regions, so these figures may change. But this is where we think this election night is heading. I'll give you the figures. Here we go. Conservatives on 27% in the lead. Second place, UK Independence Party, 17%, higher than they were 5 years ago. Driven down to 16%, exactly the figure that Polly Toynbee was just saying, the Labour Party in third place there. Now, they were 23% 5 years ago, so that's a major fall for Labour here. And they are lucky in only one respect, that the Lib Dems have performed less well than they did 5 years ago, so it's the Liberal Democrats who are in fourth place there with 14%. So I'll just take you back to the beginning here so you can take these figures in. Very important. This will be, if they are robust, this will be the percentages that the politicians and the viewers take away from tonight. Conservatives 27, UKIP second place with 17, Labour 16%, and then you see the Lib Dems in fourth place, and then the Greens 9%, BNP that is on 6%, Scottish Nationalists and the Welsh Nationalists, obviously, once you project their figures across the nation, they look very small, but the Scottish Nationalists particularly doing very, very well, as we've been hearing. And those are our predicted shares of the vote. David.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. John Curtis, who did all those calculations. What do you conclude from this for Labour, John?
Well, I think in truth, if this prediction is at all correct, and it is now based on an awful lot of results, this result is at the bottom end of Labour's expectations. We were talking about the possibility of Labour at 17, 18%. It looks as though it may be no more than 16%. And of course, in falling that low, it now looks highly likely to us that the Labour Party have fallen behind UKIP. Now, there is one slight caveat I should enter. There's been a computer failure in the southeast, and therefore, as a result, we've not been able to get the detailed voting data in the southeast, but we've done all sorts of checks on our predictions for the southeast, and we are pretty clear that we think the Labour Party are going to end up third overall.
Does that mean we're not going to get a result from the southeast?
Well, you know what computers are like, David. They have a habit of keeping us up well into the middle of the night, and maybe it's going to repeat that experience.
So compare this with the local election results and with the Euros 5 years ago. What's the message for Labour?
Well, the message for Labour, we thought back in 2004, when the Labour Party only got 23%, that it would be frankly very difficult for a major Westminster party to do any worse in a nationwide contest. The truth is the Labour Party have managed to do this. They are 7 points below where they were, if our prediction is right, as compared with 2004. But equally, the Conservatives, it looks as though, are going to only end up at roughly around the 27% that they won in 2004, that there isn't the kind of advance they were hoping for. The Liberal Democrats also probably slipping back a bit. In other words, even though the non-Westminster parties started off with a 2004 tally of around 1 in 3 of the votes, one of the stories of the night, of course emphasised by the BNP success in Yorkshire, is that again the non-Westminster parties have made further progress. Maybe around 2 in 5 of all of the votes cast on Thursday for the European elections were cast for parties outside of those currently represented at Westminster.
Does that affect the interpretation of the results in terms of a general election and the interpretation that the main political parties will put on these Euro results, well, that so many people voted for minor parties or smaller parties, let's say?
Well, there is no doubt that we're getting yet further evidence in the election, as it were, of the disjuncture between Westminster politics and the local elections we saw on Thursday night and Friday, and also the European elections. So yes, one has to be very careful about drawing conclusions, and one certainly would not argue the Labour Party would only end up with 16% of the vote in a general election now. But I think what we can say, given all the other evidence about Labour's dire position in the local elections, in the opinion polls, that we do have further confirmation the Labour Party has an awful lot of work to do if it's going to win a general election.
John, thank you very much. Dennis McShane was the Europe Minister. You've got an awful lot of work to do. Is it actually going to be possible? And do you think, Nick Robinson was talking about it, that the ground has now shifted once again under Gordon Brown tonight?
It's shifting all the time. I think back to 2004 when UKIP beat the Liberal Democrats into 4th place, and yet the Liberal Democrats in 2005 nearly doubled their number of parliamentary seats. This is an election fought on a proportional representation system, and it should give many people pause for thought. If the PR opens the door to fascists entering the House of Commons, perhaps it's not such a great scheme. We've got about 35% of the votes who, frankly, I mean no disrespect to UKIP and the BNP and the Christian Party and the Natural Law Party and Mr Declan Ganley's party, who aren't going to win serious votes in a general election. So I think there's still a lot to play for. The Conservatives still, I know we're talking about Europe tonight, but actually it's on Europe, where they are now linking up with a very odd minority party in Poland and a Czech party whose president believes there's no such thing as global warming. And I don't think the voters will want to entrust the government of our nation to a party who believes in that kind of nonsense.
Well, they say you can't cherry pick because Labour's in with all sorts of curious people
too.
Well,
I heard Eric Pickles...
Everybody's in with curious... You heard what Eric Pickles said.
I did, and I didn't know what he was talking about. I mean, the one thing I'm a bit of a bore on is Europe. And what's interesting is that in Poland, the EPP party, it's called Civic Platform, are winning handsomely, and the party the Conservatives proposed to enter an alliance with are being crushed. In Germany and France, the mainstream centre-right parties are doing well, and the extreme parties that the Tories want to talk to are doing very badly.
Well, you only came 3rd, according to our prediction, so let's leave you and go to the party that came 2nd, UKIP. And Nigel Farage joins us. So what's your reaction to this? You're beaming all over your face. 17%, you're up.
Well...
What are you up? 1% from 2004, and it's only a prediction.
Last time round...
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, last time round, we came 3rd. Everybody said it was a complete fluke, it would never be repeated, and this time we've come 2nd in a major national election. That's a hell of an achievement, especially given that over the last 3 or 4 weeks we've not really had a proper debate about the European question. The expenses scandal has dominated everything. I genuinely believe, had we debated the cost of the EU, had we debated what open borders have meant over the course of the last 5 years, that UKIP's share of the vote would have been higher still.
Liam Fox, Shadow Defence Secretary. Do you feel a bit miffed that UKIP has done so well? Isn't that the sort of territory you should have been able to occupy?
No, they have a very clear set of views about where they stand. I think that you've got to be very careful with European elections. I know that we don't ever want to say that they don't really mean very much. It's very hard to extrapolate from a European election more than anything else.
So you don't want to say they don't mean very much, but you don't think they do mean very much,
I think it's very difficult. I think it's very difficult because of turnout, because of the electoral system, as Dennis says, to be able to draw very firm conclusions, except for 2 things. One is that it's a night of great sadness for our politics to see the BNP representing the United Kingdom in the European Parliament. I think that's a terribly sad moment in our politics. All politicians should be asking themselves, how did we allow this to happen? And how do we go about dealing with the BNP? The view up till now has been, don't take them head on, because that gives them the publicity that they seek. We may have now all politicians in the mainstream parties have to decide whether we need to rethink that. That's one issue. And the other thing that's very clear is I think that this has been a very bad night for the Labour Party. It is genuinely historic. In Wales, this is the first time since 1918 Labour hasn't won the popular vote. In fact, it is the worst result for Labour nationally since 1918. And Labour MPs will now have to really rethink about whether they think there is any chance of surviving in any numbers with Gordon Brown at the helm.
Adam Price of Plaid Cymru is down in Wales. Plaid Cymru came third. I think that's right, Mr. Price, isn't it? Yes. What do you make of what's happened in Wales then? You don't seem to have gained very much. Labour fell hugely. And the vote, well, the Tories went up a couple of percentage
We're up
points.
1.5%, the Conservatives are up 2.5%.
Yeah.
But the big story, as Liam Fox has said, is the earthquake. We had an earthquake in Wales on Friday night. We've had an even bigger one today. It's off the Richter scale because the Labour Party hasn't lost an election in Wales since the khaki election of 1918. You've got to go back that long. I mean, the political landscape has changed here. We benefited. We've had a good result. The Tories have had a very good result. But Labour, I mean, this is earth-shattering for them. I mean, the Labour Party is imploding in the hardest of its heartlands. And they really don't know, I think, how they're going to get out of this appalling situation.
Explain to our viewers, if you would, why the Tories did so well out of Labour's discomfort in Wales and not Plaid Cymru.
Well, I mean, the difference is marginal, isn't it? We were up 1.5%, they were up 2.5%. I mean, I ideally would have liked to have pipped them to the post there, but I mean, the big story is, I mean, we've closed a gap of almost 100,000 between Plaid and Labour at the last Euro elections to 12,000 this time. We came very, very close to beating them, and actually we've beaten them in a number of our key target seats like Llanelli and Ynys Môn, which we're certain to win at the general election, which we want to see sooner rather than later, which is why we'll be pushing for a dissolution of Parliament on Wednesday night.
And why do you think Labour was punished? Because Nick Robinson was saying a moment ago that he doesn't remember Welsh MPs particularly suffering from the allowances crisis in Westminster. What is it about Labour in Wales that has turned the voters off?
Well, I suppose because they've won every election for 80 years, and I suppose there's a little bit of fatigue, shall we say, that maybe it's a time for new political voices. And Plaid Cymru hopes obviously that we can continue to build on the progress that we've shown tonight. I mean, there's a strange contradiction, isn't there, right across the UK and probably right across Europe as well. I haven't seen all the results, but you know, pollsters tell us that political values are shifting to the left in this economic crisis. You know, people are actually more in favour of state intervention, actually less convinced by free market fundamentalism than ever before. And yet they seem to be voting for parties of the right. Certainly they do in the UK, and the Conservatives have benefited here in Wales. So
Adam,
there is a disconnect.
Thank you very much indeed.
Plaid Cymru and the SNP.
Adam, thank you very much. I'm sorry to stop you there, but we have to move on. I want to go to Nigel Farage again in the South East just briefly. John Curtis tells us that there are computer problems down there and they're not getting the result through. Is that your information?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we've got computer problems. We've also had some fairly serious ballot paper problems. So all in all, not an especially happy night for democracy in the South East. But, you know, can I just come back on one of the points Liam Fox made earlier? You know, in the South East, the Tories have won. And a lot of people have voted Tory, believing when William Hague and David Cameron have said they're going to get a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. And I just wish we'd had a proper, honest, open debate over the course of the last few weeks.
Go on.
Nigel Farage, I was just going to ask you, will you put up candidates in the Westminster election now, even if the consequence may be to damage the more Eurosceptic Conservative Party?
At the moment, we have 300 selected prospective parliamentary candidates for the next general election. My job is to make sure that by the autumn we've got 500 candidates, and yes, we will fight that general election. It's about time we had a general election where we really discussed where 75% of our laws are made. Now, 5 years ago, we did well in these elections, but because of problems with Kilroy and all the rest of it, we really weren't in a fit state to fight that general election. It's my job to make sure this time we are.
David,
we have the proportion of the vote a moment ago. Now we're going to have a prediction of the actual seats allocation in the new Parliament. Jeremy has that.
Yes, I do, David. So we looked at the projection of where the vote would end up by the end of tonight. Just have a look here at the seats. Now, of course, key thing to point out, 78 MEPs in 2004. This year, it's gone down to 72, so there are fewer seats to go around. Conservatives, 25 seats. They had 27 last time, but it's not actually a drop because effectively that was a figure of 24. So 25 for the Conservatives shows them with a slight increase. 13 there for UKIP, they're up as well. 13 for Labour is a substantial drop. They were on 19 seats last time, albeit there are fewer to go around. It's still a big drop. And the Lib Dems there on 11 seats. So that's how we think the seats will be allocated at the end of tonight. Again, I stress partly because of the computer problems in the southeast. It's early days, but we think this is where it's going to end up.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Liam Fox, you heard Nigel Farage talking about putting up UKIP candidates against the Tories. And the proviso presumably would be that if the Tories agreed to a referendum on Lisbon, they'd withdraw their candidates.
I don't think first of all, I don't think they would. And in any case, I don't think that there's anything to be afraid of to see other parties coming into a general election. The general election we fought on a very wide range of issues, largely the economic issues. We'll have a number of social issues that we want to take account of, and voters will think of these issues in the round. And therefore, it has no fear for me to see UKIP coming into that election.
And are you excited by the damage done to Labour tonight in the sense of its effect on politics in Westminster?
Well, I think that it will have more of an effect than certainly I thought at the beginning of the evening. I think what has happened in Wales, what looks like is happening in Scotland, will shake Labour in its absolute core areas. And I think there'll be a lot of rethinking of positions going on. But I think the point's been made in this programme several times that, changing leader isn't really necessarily the answer to the problems. And the Labour Party may well now find themselves that they're damned if they do and damned if they don't.
Yeah, it didn't really help you, did it, much, for a long time?
Well, I mean, there are people...
chopped and changed leaders endlessly.
Well, there are people who would argue about the leadership of John Major and whether that's in fact won the 92 election. I think you can go into all sorts of hypotheticals, but I think the worrying thing if I was a Labour backbench would be, is there now anywhere that's safe in the country for Labour?
We're just going to go over, I will bring Labour in a second, but we're going to go over to Tim Donovan in London at the GLA where the count is being held to find out what's going on there. Tim?
David, Labour have lost one seat, but that is because there are only 8 seats being fought here this time, 9 before. The region has contracted. Their vote has actually held up. It's certainly a much better picture here than it is elsewhere in the country. The estimate here that their share has gone down perhaps 3% and that the Conservatives' share has remained more or less the same, around 27%. There's been no BNP share showing here. They're not going to win a seat. The Liberal Democrats, UKIP and Greens are going to win one each. The Greens have improved considerably. Liberal Democrats have contracted by 3 or 4%, and we expect the declaration here very shortly.
When you say very shortly, can you give us an idea?
I think we're talking in about 2 or 3 minutes.
Oh, right,
4 minutes,
good.
they're just announcing now.
Oh, Tim, thank you very much. We'll be back with you. Well, if that's true, that'll be encouraging for Labour. Dennis McShane, just if you're down just 3%.
Yes, I mean, I think there's a big problem we face in certain council house estate areas of Yorkshire, in my own constituency, which have to be resolved. We do need more social housing. People are very worried about their jobs up there in the steel and other industries, and they are protesting against the government. But a tiny technical point is that you interviewed Declan Ganley, who got a 0 result in Ireland. And the Irish vote looks now as if the Lisbon Treaty will be ratified there. And I'm just wondering where that will leave the Conservative Party before the next election. Are they going to have a retrospective referendum, or will they accept that the Lisbon Treaty is going to come into effect? It's very important, this question.
Let's go to Poole, important as that question is, to join Martin Oates, where the southwest count is. Remember, the Conservatives did well against the Liberal Democrats there. And UKIP is strong against the Liberal Democrats. Martin, do you have any idea how things are going?
Well, 35 local authority areas out of 38 have declared, so we're almost there, but just waiting for the final results. But I think what's really interesting at this stage, and we are almost there, is that Labour are in 5th place, trailing the Greens. And to give that a little bit more context, that means that their vote share is less than twice that of the BNP, who are next down the hierarchy. Now, earlier on we heard Glyn Ford, the only sitting MEP and the lead candidate, sounding pretty pessimistic about the outlook, but as he said, at that point the fat lady hadn't sung. Well, she's not finished singing yet, but I think for him it's clear she's singing the blues tonight.
And do you know when we're going to get a result?
No, we're told shortly as well, but there's no indication quite yet as to when it'll be.
OK, well, we've had 4 of the 12 regions. We're only going to get 10 tonight if they do all come in tonight. Scotland won't declare tonight, and Northern Ireland doesn't start actually counting until tomorrow. But we're waiting on London, Emily.
Yes, and you all keep talking about fat ladies. I'm not sure we want to pick up right here, but we will nevertheless. Interesting that while Labour is having a disastrous night, the Lib Dems don't really seem to be